Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today we have a giant stream. Honestly, I expected the M4 MacBook Air to be announced today alone, and then maybe tomorrow a new Mac Studio. We got both. So please tune in. Please do all the YouTube jazz, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, super chatting, super stickering, becoming channel members, becoming Patreon members. However you choose to support me, the community, it's all very, very much appreciated. But today we are going through a big one because I know that this community really cares about Macs, about high performance Apple products. I know we love analyzing big dies, big chips, the performance they bring, how they scale. And today we are definitely getting a lot of that because, yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode with Mark Tech. Welcome to the continuation of a crazy week of coverage. Today we got an M3 Ultra processor, a Mac Studio that is giving you the choice between an M4 Max chip or M3 Ultra processors, a new MacBook Air coming at $999, which means it's actually taking the place of the previous M2 generation MacBook Air in terms of pricing, and it gives you the M4 processor. And all of that we kind of have to go through simultaneously after just yesterday's coverage of the new iPad Air and the new A16 base level iPad. I already see some familiar names in the chat. Relay saying, Mark, new products are out, stop sleeping. And I already responded, yeah, I literally just had to run from work. And once again, I just had time to change my shirt. So I definitely was not sleeping. And thank you to Steve leaving a 249 super chat saying hype gym workout material. So I'll take it as you being very enthusiastic about today's coverage. Good luck at the gym. I'll definitely be hitting the gym right after this stream, depending on how long the stream actually lasts. But to anybody who is just here for the first time, this is a channel primarily focused on Apple stuff. We do a lot of coverage, especially like this. This is a channel primarily focused on live streams. So when you can join, you can ask questions, have agreements or disagreements with me, little debates. It's all very, very cool to me, especially on days like these. And let's actually look what Apple has in store for us. So let's start with the new Mac Studio itself, because as a piece of hardware, it is the least exciting in terms of like the box itself. At least the MacBook Air got like a new color, but in terms of what's inside, it's definitely the most exciting reveal we are seeing today. There's no way for Mac to use eGPU, right? No, not at this stage. We like big chips with big numbers. I like big chips and I cannot lie. That's okay. That's all the repping you're going to get from me today. But yeah, we definitely like big chips here. So Mac Studio coming at the same $1999 starting price. So replacing the M2 Max and Ultra version. Yeah, I know a lot of you were waiting for like M4 Ultra variants. It seems for whatever reason, whatever Apple is doing with the M4 Max, there is a good chance that you are going to see M4 Ultra chips in the new Mac Studio. In the new Mac Pro that's supposedly coming later. So whatever happened with the development or the pricing or the availability of the M3 Ultra until now, Apple seemingly believes that they have enough M3 Max dies to create enough M3 Ultra processors to meet demand. They're also going all out, way crazier than the M2 Ultra, with up to 512 gigabytes of unified memory, 16 terabytes of storage. Also, this M3 Ultra, contrary to the rest of the M3 family, also supports Thunderbolt 5. So it's a very different thing. Now, it does not offer anything else over like M3 Max in terms of like architectural changes. We still will expect M4 Max to largely have a faster single core performance, for example. But in terms of GPU, we know they have the exact amount of cores. The M3 Ultra uses the slower 6400 mega transfers memory, but of course M3 Ultra, thanks to being two huge dies, has a huge 512-bit bus. So That at least gives it some edge over the M4 Max, but quite honestly, the M4 Max is already so powerful. I think that for the Mac Studio, it's a good chip. But if you are absolutely crazy and if you're working with like the largest LLMs out there and stuff like that, the M3 Ultra Mac Studio with 512 gigs of RAM or 256 gigs of RAM might actually be like a crazy good deal for you. The 16 terabytes of storage are ridiculously overpriced, as is all Apple storage. So I think Apple is just betting on the fact that some people just don't want to deal with external storage. But yes, all concerns that the Mac Studio might just be like space limited in some ways for more RAM, more storage, faster chips. Yeah, that's just not happening. This device is an absolute beast. So, how does Apple advertise this? Thunderbolt 5, of course, Thunderbolt 5 having been introduced with the M4 family of chips, but now also being kind of retroactively ported to the M3 family, thanks to the M3 Ultra. 512 gigs of unified memory, that's of course only for the Ultra chip, and so is 16 terabytes of RAM. All in a compact design, the ultimate pro desktop delivers even more performance. Sorry, I definitely have to drink because otherwise I will lose my voice as I did yesterday. Let me briefly check on my iPad. The stream is working fine. That's great. As always, whenever there are any technical issues, let me know. I want to fix anything if anything comes up as soon as possible for you guys. So, Apple today announced the new Mac Studio, the most powerful Mac ever made, featuring M4 Max and the new M3 Ultra chip. The ultimate pro desktop delivers groundbreaking pro performance, extensive connectivity now with Thunderbolt 5, and new capabilities in its compact and quiet design that can live right on a desk. Mac Studio can tackle the most intense workloads with its powerful CPU, Apple's advanced graphics architecture, high unified memory capacity, ultra-fast SSD storage, and a faster and more efficient neural engine. It provides a big boost in performance compared to the previous gen and a massive leap for users coming from older Macs. So this is a very, very standard pitch. Once again, I am just wondering if Apple was capable of making an M3 Ultra chips for all this time, why did they not introduce an M3 Max and M3 Ultra Max Studio, right? Like, and at this point, we would kind of be like ready for an M4 Max and M4 Ultra Max Studio. They wouldn't even have to go that crazy. If they introduced this almost a year ago, they could have maxed it out at like 256 gigs of storage. They could have kept it at Thunderbolt 4, and now we would have more upgrades to look forward to. But now we have this weird in between where I would argue if you were already happy with like an M2 Max Studio, for example, you will be very happy with an M4 Max Studio. But if you're somebody who's like just wants a tiny bit of extra performance over M4 Max, the fact that, yeah, sure, you're getting that with M3 Ultra, especially with the GPU, probably with the neural engine, most likely especially for large tasks that need all that crazy amount of memory. But now you're giving up single core performance, which was one of the core pitches of Apple Silicon, that unlike server class chips, including even things like Threadripper, but especially what Intel does with Xeon processors, you don't give up single core performance when you're moving up to higher core variants. Here now you do, and that's very shameful is a big word to me, but it's a big shame to me in general. Oh, blah, 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 big boost, powerhouse for AI, capable of running LLMs, so Apple definitely is targeting the AI market here. Over 600 billion parameters entirely in memory, so that's thanks to the huge 512 gigabytes of unified memory. The most ever in a personal computer. So I thought they might push it to 256 gigabytes with the new Mac Studio. Granted, I did not expect until yesterday, I did not expect to get the new Mac Studio this week at all, but now they're pushing it to 512 gigabytes, which also leads me to believe maybe they just had so much of that memory that they were like, oh, let us use up all the M3 Max dice we have like lying around. Let us use up all the memory we have lying around. And by the time it comes to making a Mac Pro, granted, by the time though they make the Mac Pro, the M5 generation will be out and will hit like different, like the same problems we've had for a while. Apple, please keep updating your desktops on a similar timeline as your laptops. It's not too much to ask. Like, I'm fine with you saying, okay, we have the M4 chip, right? We're gonna make M4 Pro, M4 Max dice too. It's all going into laptops right away, all supply hitting the MacBook Pros, whatever. Okay, that's fine. We also have Mac Minis, iMacs, but those don't even feature the Max chips. Okay, give us 4 or 5 months, and then we'll give you a desktop chip with the latest processors. And that's halfway to what they've done by giving you the M4 Max, but not the final way, because now they're giving you the M3 Ultra. So this is where like my confusion comes from, because you finally did what I'm asked you to, which is, and to me, the Mac Studio is far more important going forward than the Mac Pro. I know the Mac Pro has some historic relevance for Apple. I know it's an upgradable machine, but with its $7,000 base price, I do believe that the Mac Studio just fundamentally is better value, even without upgradability. So the fact that the Mac Studio is now supposedly being hamstrung with an older gen Ultra chip, and according to Mark Gurman, the M4 based Mac Pro will have the M4 Ultra chip. So I just don't get it. The M4 Mac, or just the Mac Pro in general, is not that important of a PC for Apple. It's also built for Apple Intelligence, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, if Apple can say that the base M3 chip is built for Apple Intelligence, they can say the same thing about M3 Ultra and M4 Max. The new Mac Studio is available pre-order today with availability beginning March 12th, so that largely lines up with what we got for yesterday's iPads 2. This is coming now from John Turnus, obviously Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering. It's the most powerful Mac we've ever made, complete game changer for pros around the world, powering both home and pro studios, class of its own, yadi da di da. Like, there's nothing crazy here. So, and of course, this image is just like, it's just gonna make you pull your hair out if you are just like a perfectionist or like somebody with light OCD who is like, Apple, come on, just draw a freaking 4 here and give us the best chip you can. Guys, we have a lot more of you joining. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your viewership, really appreciate your support. So please, if you haven't yet done so, like this video, support this channel by subscribing, sharing out the video, and commenting. I love interacting with a lively comment section. If you feel like it, you can leave a small donation in the form of a super chat or super sticker, become a direct supporter here on YouTube as a channel member, or support you over on Patreon if you go through the links in this channel. Thank you so much for joining. Ask me anything you want to know. Debate me if you have some crazy disagreements. We are just getting started here. The new Mac Studio with M4 Max is the perfect choice for video editors, which is crazy to say because obviously they have a more expensive Mac Studio to sell. Colorists, developers, engineers, photographers, creative pros, and other users who need to blaze through intensive workflows. It delivers phenomenal single-threaded CPU performance with the world's fastest CPU core, something you are not getting on the M3 Ultra, along with outstanding multi-threaded CPU performance for complex workloads. Flood-ready saying, would you get the M3 Ultra or the M4 Max? Well, for my personal usage, like streaming, doing regular like docs and stuff like that, honestly, anything over the M4 Pro Mac Mini is overkill. But given that there is some price overlay even here, because for a $2,000 device, the M4 Max, even the binned version, is not a bad chip by any means. I would probably get just the cheapest Mac Studio, bump up the storage to 1 terabyte, and then just use the device also with maybe some external storage for the best possible value. YouTube Cool and Cheesy, long-term support over the channel joining. I think in terms of features, the only thing the M3 generation misses from the M4 is hardware 8K H264 HEVC encode. Yeah, they could also though compensate for that because now they have double the encoders, obviously, right? So they might have worse encoders, but they have more for it. Can't think of anything else that's major apart from maybe some niche ARM v9 features. When we are talking raw features, I agree. But there is some general stuff that even for like the people who want like this crazy amount of memory, like the M3 generation uses slower 6400 mega transfers memory, right? The M4 Max, the M4 Pro and M4 Max chips use 8500, 8533 mega transfers memory. So by just going with the M4 generation, you would get faster single core performance, a tiny boost to GPU performance just on an architectural basis. Apple themselves says that, for example, the A18 has a lot more 3D rendering and like ray tracing performance than the A17. That's pretty much also the uplift that you get here. So while I don't expect the M3 Ultra to be slower in anything but single core performance, it's a shame that but it could have been even faster. That's what I'm saying. Asif Bai joining and screaming, Oppo. Good for you, man. Ulrich Goodrich saying, I thought the M3 line of chips and their predecessors all had a microcode error that had serious security errors that had to be patched in software. All of this is complete nonsense. Because technically, yes, you can find some security errors in literally every chip ever made. And yes, some of it might be patched in software and cost you a minuscule amount of performance, but there is no reason to be paranoid about it. We are not in the Spectre and Meltdown days where like the performance overhead that you need to create to deal with those security issues is actually significant amount. It's almost like a half generational leap. None of that has ever happened to M1, M2, M3, M4. So while yes, every chip will have some even hardware-based security vulnerabilities, don't lose your panties over it. So 16-core CPU, that's of course 12 performance cores, 4 efficiency cores for the M4 Max, 40-core GPU, half a terabyte per second of unified memory bandwidth. That's coming from a 512-bit bus. I should say, by the way, the M3 Ultra has a 1024-bit bus. But this one has a 512-bit bus with 8533 memory, and a neural engine that is over 3 times faster than M1 Max. Of course, they're still trying to sneak in an Intel-based comparison. Obviously, I don't think if you're an Intel-based Mac user, any of these Macs, like whether we're talking M1 Max, M2 Max, Mac Studio, it's all such a giant uplift. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the exact numbers. But if you were wondering, it's 6.1 times faster than the most powerful Intel-based 27-inch iMac, which is funny. The GPU in M4 Max, so it starts with 36 gigs of memory, goes up to 128, so that's important. If you're working with somewhat smaller large language models, you will still be able to nicely utilize the M4 Max. Given that the M3 Ultra has only double the memory bus, they could have also put in 256 gigabytes here if they wanted to. So this is a very deliberate choice by Apple to make the Ultra have something very, very unique, right? Like 512 gigabytes might legit be overkill for most people. But 256 gigabytes is legitimately what a lot of LLM developers are asking for these days. They do manage to max out the 128 gigabytes, for example, on the M4 Max that is inside the MacBook Pro. But now, obviously, if you want to get a lot more, the entry price changes. Apple gets to sell off older M3 Max dies and older 6400 mega transfers per second memory. So it's an interesting conundrum to find ourselves in. Apple also advertises the powerful media engine in the M4 Max. They do not talk about 8K, but yes, 8K rendering, encoding, decoding was introduced. So technically, that's architecturally something that the M4 is optimized for, that the M3 wouldn't be. But then again, the M3 Max will literally have, the M3 Ultra will literally have double the encoders of all of those. So take it as you will. A real-life test will show you how well the M3 Ultra makes all of that extra silicon scale. Eric Goldrich, Apple M series chips, including the M3 chip, have a hardware flaw that could expose cryptographic keys. Yeah, I know. I'm saying you should not worry about it in any way, shape, or form. You need hardware-level access to it. You need specialized tools. If you worry about this, you should probably be getting some kind of like hyper-secure product that's like military grade encrypted and shit like that already gives up some of its performance for extra security. Please don't scare regular consumers away with shit like this. I understand that stuff like this technically exists, but it really at 0.001% is like the impact it might ever have on a regular consumer. Tippermaster joining. Apple continuing to compare to 5-year-old Intel designs that were designed up to 10 years ago is kind of lame. What do you mean? I mean, it's one comparison. They still want people to switch. They do not hide it like that. They're comparing it here to the M1 Max. I mean, yeah, they could have compared it to the M2 Max. But I mean, the M2 Max is like 20 to 30% faster than the M1 Max. So get rid of at best 1/3 of that increase, and now you're dealing with like a 2.3, 2.4 times increase over the M2 Max. It's really nothing like crazy. It's one comparison out of several. I wouldn't be like that pedantic. And you know, guys, I like being pedantic. I guess M4 Ultra will be Mac Pro exclusive. Maybe S2 says iOS, because yeah, like that. This is something that Mark Gurman floated just yesterday on Twitter, and I was just like, ooh, not sure if I believe this. Don't get me wrong. I still don't like that it's an M3 Ultra, but I would prefer to analyze the M3 Ultra as it is right now and then see if it makes any sense, for example, in terms of pricing. But unfortunately for myself, I know that with its 256, 512 gigabytes of RAM, it appeals to a subset of people that will just not be in this community, right? Like, people genuinely don't care as much about 10 or even 15, 20% performance differences these days if they can get more memory, right? I mean, NVIDIA's Quadro cards run slower than their GeForce cards, right? They do not have the same peak clock speeds. Usually, like, it depends, but like definitely not to the level of like a 5090, for example. But they have a lot more memory, and that's developers spent like 3-4 times the money for it just to get double, triple the memory. This is stuff the only big mark can afford. Yeah, believe me though, I'm a laptop guy through and through, because it's like, I would also need to find like a display to connect it to, because they finally have a desktop Mac with Thunderbolt 5. And guess what? We didn't get a Pro Display XDR 2 or an Apple Studio Display 2. So when it comes to the overall family of Apple desktops, which to me includes stuff like their Magic Keyboard accessories, I would love a Magic Keyboard that actually has backlit keys. They still don't make that. I would love a Thunderbolt 5 display that is 5 or even 6K at 120 Hertz. They still don't make that. But guess what? If I want a great Apple keyboard, a great Apple trackpad, and I can pair it with a mouse of my choice, and I can get it with a mini LED 1000 nits 120 hertz display. That's what I get with a MacBook Pro, and that's where I am. So yeah, this is not even about being a baller or not, but like also here like a Tipo Master about the comparisons to Intel Macs. It's just part of it. The main comparison across the board, the first comparisons, they always mention RDM1 Max. So I wouldn't be too angry here. Last chatter, you're asking, why is Mac Pro? I highly assume you mean, where is Mac Pro? According to Mark Gurman, it's coming in the second half of the year, and it's coming with the M4 Ultra. At that point, though, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Apple just simultaneously like says, oh, you know what? We sold out of M3 Ultra chips on the Mac Studios. We're going to put the M4 Ultra there too. There you go, guys. And then by the same time they introduce that Mac Pro and maybe update the Mac Studio again, they will also have like a DM5 family waiting around the corner on the new MacBook Pro. So yeah, so let's look 1.6 times faster in Adobe Photoshop. So we are looking here still at the M4 Max. So the comparisons do make a lot of sense. We are looking at with Adobe Photoshop of a very single core dependent workflow. And while there are benchmarks that give you up to 2 times faster single core performance on M4 Max than M1 Max, it's not always perfect. It depends on if you can leverage some ARMv9 instructions or not. There might be some like single core memory bandwidth limitations. So 1.6 times faster in Adobe Photoshop than M1 Max, almost 3 times faster than the 27-inch iMac with Core i9. Obviously, we are now looking at pretty old technology, and you can also see that Photoshop does not do the greatest job of scaling with raw performance, because of course, especially once you consider multi-core performance, the M4 Max has way more than 3x over this old Core i9. Flood Ready, if Apple is providing such crazy performance now as an afterthought, what the heck will they provide at WWDC? Well, WWDC is a software event. Like we might historically associate it with the launch of like Mac Pros and higher-end MacBooks and stuff like that. That hasn't really been the case for a while. They do talk occasionally about hardware, and I guess the biggest example for that was kind of when they talked about the Apple Silicon transition, but that's also because the Apple Silicon transition, to not a small degree, is defined by software, right? The fact that macOS is entirely optimized around Apple Silicon, the fact that Rosetta allows for compatibility with older x86-based applications and stuff like that. But overall, I don't think we're gonna see necessarily that much more hardware at WWDC. Maybe the Mac Pro, and who knows what they'll do with that. Maybe they will allow you to connect an extra 512 gigs of RAM, and somehow it will still work as unified memory. But I'm not sure. Maybe it will just be the Mac Pro with an M4 Ultra chip that's just like scales like 15% higher across the board than the M3 Ultra, but it's also gonna come with a $3,000 higher entry price. When it comes to Xcode, over 2 times faster than M1 Max, over 3 times faster than the Core i9. This is actually a surprisingly good result for the Core i9. 1.2 times faster ProRes transcode. So this is honestly something where I would love to see if like I don't know if the scaling between because M1, M2 Max, M3 Max had basically the same ProRes transcode performance. I wonder if they doubled M4 Max, they could get you like better scaling, right? If this was literally the full like 2.4x at that point. With the M3 Ultra, I doubt that it will be like more than 1.8 times faster than M1 Max, for example. But then again, the M3 Ultra makes way more sense to be compared against the M1 Ultra, and the M1 Ultra had severe scaling issues, often barely giving you any transcode boost from all the extra media encoders and decoders. Almost 3 times faster when it comes to the Core i9. Again, pretty decent results for the Core i9 here. 1.6 times faster than Topaz Video AI, than M1 Max. So here, I actually don't know where they run this test. If it's like neural engine optimized, or if it's neural engine plus GPU or only GPU. They repeatedly bring up this benchmark, so maybe at some point I should like do some research into it. And it's up to 5 times faster than the fastest 27-inch iMac with Core i9. So, but of course, it doesn't end here, because the main part of the show, for some reason, is actually the M3 Ultra. They advertise this as having 2.6 times the performance of M1 Ultra, Thunderbolt 5, and support for more than 0.5 terabyte of unified memory. So they actually gave it its own article. It's also crazy, crazy large. It's powered by UltraFusion. So this is actually fascinating, because die shot analysis of the M3 Max showed that it doesn't have the same UltraFusion interconnect as M1, or M2 Ultra. So either those were cut M3 Max chips where the interconnect could have been like literally physically cut off because it just wasn't needed, or it's a separate die, or the UltraFusion works very differently from the one on M1 and M2 Ultra. They say it's connected over 10,000 high-speed connections, offer low latency and high bandwidth, and obviously if you combine 2 M3 Max dies, one M3 Max die being roughly 90 billion transistors, you end up with a chip that houses 184 billion transistors. That's on TSMC's 3nm node, probably N3B. Did Apple at some point maybe port the M3 Max to N3E? I have no idea. It would be a crazy thing to do, but also with the crazy situation surrounding semiconductors, I wouldn't be surprised. I would be shocked, but I wouldn't be quite surprised. So this is coming from Johnny Cerrucci, of course, Apple Senior Vice President of Hardware Technologies, calling the M3 Ultra the pinnacle of our scalable SoC architecture, aimed specifically at users who run the most heavily threaded and bandwidth-intensive applications. It has up to 32 CPU cores. That's, of course, 28 performance cores, and no, it would be... It would be 24 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores, massive GPU with up to 80 cores, support for the most unified memory ever in a personal computer, Thunderbolt 5, and industry-leading power efficiency. There's no chip like M3 Ultra. So here they're making comparisons directly versus M1 and M2 Ultra, 1.5x versus M2 Ultra, 1.8x over M1 Ultra. I assume if you just went to M4 Ultra, we would just have like flatly double the M1 Ultra, maybe slightly above it or something like that. And GPU performance is doubled over the M2 Ultra and 2.6 times faster than M1 Ultra. Again, if we had gone to the M4 Ultra, we would probably be looking at roughly tripling the performance of the M1 Ultra. The gap between M3 and M4 generationally in terms of its GPU capabilities is not that crazy. It benefits definitely from the faster memory on M4 chips, but it's not over 20%. Tippermaster, I wonder if M4 Ultra or M5 Ultra, if they skip it, will move from UltraFusion to better scaling tiles, as Cerrucci dropped a rare hint in an interview talking about future advanced packaging. Yeah, that might be it though. That might be the case that they really had enough M3 Max dies, and they had like UltraFusion interposers. It might just be the same UltraFusion interposer that they used for the M2 Ultra, right? And they said, like, let's get rid of as much of that hardware as possible. And you also have to consider that if not enough consumers buy M3 Ultra chips, Apple doesn't lose anything by that. They can use those chips internally, right? They can run AI tests themselves on them if they want to. They can build a small server for themselves. And by a small server, I mean a small server farm. It would obviously be a giant server in comparison. But like the M3 Ultra here almost seems like a little bit of leftovers, but it's such a good chip. Don't forget, Zen 5 is still 4 nanometer. RDNA 5 still 4 nanometer. I know RDNA 4 still 4 nanometer. RTX 5000 still 4 nanometer. Intel is now on 3 nanometer by TSMC, but with the performance level of like Apple's first generation 5 nanometer chips and the efficiency level of like Apple's N7P chips sometimes. So Apple can get away with this simply because of a lack of competition. Like we saw like that Project Digits thing from NVIDIA that offers you, I believe, up to 256 gigs of memory, but it's like not really that fast. Here you get a lot of CPU performance, a lot of GPU performance, you get even more memory, plus of course you get a full-on system that is actually optimized around ARM. With Project Digits, you would have to hope that ARM Linux works well, or God forbid you use Windows on ARM. So, but yeah, one thing that also irks me here, again, I've mentioned it before, using the M3 architecture with its older memory controllers means you're also using a slower 6400 megatransfers memory, 6400 megatransfers memory over a 1024-bit bus, which, yes, is crazy, offers you 800 gigabits per second. That unfortunately means it has the same memory bandwidth as the previous generation Ultra chips, which if you really want to push more performance, you kind of want more memory bandwidth too, at least on the GPU front. On the CPU, you're probably fine. AI professionals can use Studio with M3 Ultra to run LLMs with over 600 billion parameters. That is absolutely huge. Like this is crazy. I've seen some tests with 100 billion parameters on M4 Max MacBook Pros with 128 gigs of memory. And obviously, like, yeah, now you have like 4 times the memory, so you can run even larger LLMs, making it the ultimate desktop for AI development. And look, guys, I know we're gonna debate like the value for pros and stuff like that, but pros buy up older chips, less efficient chips that aren't even that well optimized, as long as they do one thing that they really needed to do really well. And this thing, having access to this crazy amount of memory, might be way more enough for developers to say, oh, it's 15% slower in single core performance? What do I care? I only run the GPU, the neural engine, and the memory. In fact, I'm paying 80-90% of the money for the memory and nothing else. Astuce's iOS, someone used 8 external displays for real? I doubt it. It's probably more of a mix of like how high quality you're going to push those screens. So if Apple eventually goes to something like a 6K 120 hertz display, maybe even with like a super high 12 or even 16-bit panel, right? Then you definitely won't be able to control 8 of those displays, right? And 4 displays wouldn't be too crazy for some pros. But yeah, 8 displays is a little bit much. Even with ultra wides, like especially with ultra wides, you can save on how many displays you use, but now you're probably looking at not more than 2. And with regular 16:9 screens, I doubt you would be using way more than 3. And I mean, even here, they show it like working with 2. So unparalleled memory, already covered that. Thunderbolt 5, that's of course a very interesting tidbit for anyone who really follows Apple and the technology they put inside their Macs, because of course we have covered Thunderbolt 5 that is inside the M4 Pro and M4 Max devices, and now they're bringing it to the M3 Ultra. We don't know how they are doing it. Maybe they're combining Thunderbolt 4 controllers for that, but I doubt that would give them enough bandwidth for as many Thunderbolt 5 controllers as they have. Or maybe they put even like a separate die on the on the motherboard that handles some extra Thunderbolt connectivity. I'm not sure. Oh, no, they're saying Thunderbolt 5 port. Each Thunderbolt 5 port is supported by its own custom designed controller directly on the chip. Okay. Wait, why did the M3 Max then not support it? Did they upgrade the M3 Max die silently with Thunderbolt 5 and like an UltraFusion interconnect? What is this? What zombie chip is this? How? So direct dedicated bandwidth for each port on Mac Studio. So that's important. Sometimes whenever you have like really high speed bandwidth solutions, you would look at you would look at like two ports maybe sharing one controller, right? So you would have to know in which ports to stick your Thunderbolt cables so you get full speed from each port. And overall, you might have like four Thunderbolt, 4 or 5 ports, but realistically with only 2 controllers or something like that. The fact that every port on the Mac Studio, including the front ports, is advertising as having its own Thunderbolt 5 controller is actually quite crazy and makes it quite unique in the industry. Vladislav saying, it seems that M3 Ultra and M4 Ultra can indeed be considered separate chips. M3 Max doesn't have TB5, but M3 Ultra does. I think M3 Ultra is 2 M3 Max dies with TB5, but made on N3E. That would be a very interesting solution. I've seen some people on Twitter argue about that too. Wow, then the MacBook Pro M3 Max might be able to run Thunderbolt 5, but don't. Yeah, maybe. I'm honestly not sure. Master, yes, there's no reason they couldn't mix and match IP on chips, as it appears they say they did. Oh, I fully understand they can do that. But my question is why? Why mix and match with M3 Max dies if you already have the M4 Max that gives you better video encoders and decoders by default, gives you better single core performance by default with a newer instruction set that gives you all. By the way, I'm not sure if maybe this M3 Ultra also has the neural engine maybe from the M4 family. I'm not sure at this point. Anything could happen, right? But by default, I would assume it has the slightly slower a neural engine from the M3 family. You have the slow memory controller, which results in the usage of slower memory, which this clearly is still the case. So my question is, why mix and match? Why put in the extra work of like zombieing around with the M3 Max if you already have the M4 Max? My only speculation could be here is that this has been in the works for quite a long time, then hit some issues to the point that Apple was actually almost ready to launch M4. But now that they already have M4, they still had this lying around. And instead of completely canceling there, we're like, you know what? It's an extra way to differentiate the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro. And hell, if it doesn't sell at all, we might as well just upgrade it in 6 months anyway, right? That's how I feel. They still call it M3 because of CPU and GPU architecture mostly, and the node. Yeah, like I understand why they wouldn't call it like M3.5 Ultra or something like that, or why they wouldn't call it M4 minus Ultra. But it's still interesting. Yeah. So I understand the argument that they want to create differentiation with the Mac Pro. I assume the Mac Pro did not sell, right? Can we agree with that? If Apple feels the need to differentiate the Mac Pro from the Mac Studio, it probably meant that the $3,000 upcharge did not seem justified to consumers who were looking at like, oh, but it still has the same performance and it doesn't have like GPU support nor memory support, making its upgradability kind of limited to storage. Yeah, like so this is probably the biggest takeaway here, which is that the M2 Ultra Mac Pro just sold abysmally in comparison to the M2 Ultra Mac Studio. Vladislav coming in again. Interestingly, TrendForce also claims that the M3 Ultra chip will be fabricated with TSMC's M3 node. Interesting. Why not M4 Ultra and M4 Extreme? Well, I don't think we're getting Extreme chips. The issue with Extreme chips, right? Extreme chips were like supposedly like 4 dies combined. For one, they're legit scaling issues if you really want to connect that many chips. But look, for example, at the CPU. We went from 8 performance cores on M1 Max and M2 Max to 12 performance cores. So we kind of already have more cores. And even when you look at the GPU, I mean, yeah, it probably is difficult to put way more transistors on one die at this point, and then you combine 2 dies. But I'm pretty sure they can get you up to 100 GPU cores by giving you 50 GPU cores per max die. At that point, you kind of get already most of the performance almost anyone would need. And we also asked like, oh, what about memory, right? An Extreme chip would have like 2,000, like a 2,000-bit memory bus, but they can already give you 512 gigabytes of storage here, 512 gigabytes of memory. So what, which is funny because 512 gigabytes of memory here is like more than the entry-level storage of many Macs, which start at 256 gigabytes. But yeah, I don't think that Extreme is coming anytime soon. This is an N3E, strange indeed. I'm not sure, but maybe it is. Sorry guys for drinking so much, but like I like literally ran like crazy from work, freshened up very quickly, and so yeah, I'm like dehydrated as F. Let me just like position myself a little bit more comfortably. So Thunderbolt 5, again, 120 gigabits per second. There's nothing surprising here. Thunderbolt 4 maxed out at 40 gigabits per second. That does not mean that you get triple the bandwidth overall, because Thunderbolt 4 was 40 gigabits per second in each direction. Thunderbolt 5 is now 80 gigabits per second in each direction, but you can also give up basically your second connection to turn one connection into 120 gigabits per second connection. So very interesting, but nothing new, right? Cutting edge technologies built in. I think this is the same. Actually, let me look that up. Apple Newsroom M2 Ultra. I think that's the same. I think that's the same interconnect speed as they had before. 10,000 signals, 2.5 terabytes per second of low latency inter-processor bandwidth. Okay, so now this makes more sense to me. Like, seemingly the M3 Max is probably capable of being UltraFusion interconnected. Maybe they had even to create a separate die, like an M3 Max, and they gave it like Thunderbolt 5 and UltraFusion. But the interposer they're using here is 100% the same as on the M2 Ultra. So they're basically reusing stuff as much as they can whilst creating one unique aspect to it, which is the amount of memory that you can use it with. Okay, knowing that they have changed nothing about UltraFusion does suggest to me that M4 Ultra might be built on a new UltraFusion, but that UltraFusion might honestly not be ready. But they really couldn't afford to sell the M2 Mac Studio anymore. So they were like, you know what? Let us just give it. Like, we have the M3 Max dies, we have the M2 Ultra based UltraFusion thing. We can combine them, they will work just fine. There will probably be some scaling issues though, because this is definitely like it's not like I'm saying, oh, this is a low amount of interprocessor bandwidth, right? But the M2 Ultra had some scaling issues. So, and the M3 Ultra will be a lot more powerful than the M2 Ultra in many ways. Now, while you can compensate for those scaling issues architecturally, but without faster memory bandwidth and without a faster interposer, I'm honestly not sure if we'll be able to avoid scaling issues on the M3 Ultra. That honestly just leads me back to my original conclusion that most people interested in the Mac Studio should probably just get the M4 Max version. 2 times the resources of M3 Max. By the way, whoever mentioned 8K ProRes 422? Going back, no, 8K. Oh, okay. So 8K for H.264 and HEVC is missing, but 8K for ProRes is here. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, the media engines do then seem to be the same as in the M3 Max. The display engine supports up to 8 Pro Display XDRs. So if they were to make a Pro Display XDR that is literally like twice that with 120 hertz, that could go down to 4, and at that point it becomes more reasonable than 8. But I also would postulate that it's very likely that people will use the Thunderbolt 5 ports for things other than displays. So I finally feel like I have drank enough. Guys, 30 people of you here. Thank you so much. Please consider supporting this channel, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. You guys see I love interacting with your chats. If you really want me to read your chat, you can leave it as a super chat or a super sticker. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube, a supporter over on Patreon. All support is very much appreciated. Secure enclave, blah, blah, blah. So this is just like architectural shit. Better for environment, I'm sure. So this is the Mac Studio again. The M3. Oh, these are now some comparisons to Apple's crazier devices, right? So 16.9 times faster token generation using a large language model with hundreds of billions of parameters in LM Studio when compared to Mac Studio with M1 Ultra, thanks to its massive amounts of unified memory. 2 times faster rendering in Max on Redshift than the M1 Ultra. This is a surprisingly small uplift, and this is the one kind of uplift that I am sure would be significantly faster by using the M4 architecture. As I said, Apple advertises the A18 to be significantly faster at 3D rendering and therefore ray tracing than the A17 chip. A18 roughly lines up with the M4 chips. A17 roughly lines up with the M3 chips. So yeah, makes sense. YouTube colon cheese. I'm surprised to find out that the M3 Max supported Thunderbolt 5, but also kind of not. This was clear that the M3 Max was a chip on a leak of its own. This is one thing though, like if it supported Thunderbolt 5, I wonder if Apple waited for some kind of validation for it and they just reached that phase at this point, right? So I'm not sure. Or they legit like ported some M4 stuff to the M3 Ultra. So it's hard to say. 6.4 times faster than the W5700X. That's not surprising. This card is garbage at ray traced stuff. It's also not a very big GPU in general, so I wouldn't be like too excited. Honestly, this could be even 10 times faster if they like jump to the M4 Ultra here. 1.1 times faster base scaling for DNA sequence. Okay, so this task does seemingly not scale at all. uh, over other Apple Silicon devices, but it's 21 times faster versus Intel, 1.4 times faster 8K rendering versus M1 Ultra, 4 times faster versus the W5700X. So this is where I legitimately have to come in and say, like, really, you're probably fine with the M4 Max. You're probably way more than fine with tasks like video editing here. Again, Thunderbolt, we've already covered that. Built for Apple Intelligence, that's mentioned in literally every new Apple device. They tout a little bit the Pro Display XDR here, but they don't have something new to talk about. Oh, Jesus. But who knows? Maybe tomorrow they will introduce a Pro Display XDR 2, which would be nigh insanity to then talk about this Pro Display XDR today, which is several years old. But I doubt that this is going to happen. Yeah, to be fair, it's not clear. This is the M3 Max we've already seen 1.5 years ago, especially considering the die shots we had didn't have UltraFusion. Yeah, so it's a very interesting story. I would definitely love to see an M3 Ultra die breakdown. But we've now been here for almost an hour talking about the highest end Macs. Let's talk about the Macs that are actually affordable to more of us. And let's talk about a surprising move and some surprising choices that Apple has made with the MacBook Air. Now, I will not talk today about stuff like tariffs, inflation, other things that could force prices to go up. Because honestly, it doesn't matter, because today Apple brought prices down. The M4 MacBook Air replaces not the M3 MacBook Air in their family, which was a $1099 product with 16 gigabytes of memory and 256 gigabytes of storage, but in fact it replaces the M2 MacBook Air, which was a $999 product with 16 gigabytes of memory and 256 gigabytes of storage. It also is advertised as having very good battery life, 18 hours, 12 megapixel center stage camera. So this is something it's borrowing from the MacBook Air Pro. And an enhanced external display support, though not quite the way we expected. Many of us expected external display support to be partially enhanced by having one extra Thunderbolt port, but that's not the case. We're keeping two Thunderbolt ports on one side. Those ports are now Thunderbolt 4, because part of the Thunderbolt 4 specification is the support for multiple external displays, and now it obviously meets that criteria. No Thunderbolt 5 for it. That makes sense. The base M4 MacBook Pro didn't have it either. But yeah, so an interesting product, compromised in some ways, definitely, and there are definitely still a lot of reasons to get the M4 MacBook Pro over it. But now that the price difference between it and the MacBook Pro is $400 for the 512 gigabyte versions, right? Because yeah, you could say the difference is $600, but now you're working with very different like storage amounts. Now it makes way more sense for people who really want to save money, in my opinion, to go with the MacBook Air. Previously, I would have said, spend a little bit more, get the MacBook Pro, you get the faster sustained performance, the nicer display, right? But with this very significant amount of difference in money, 33% more money, now it honestly makes sense. And granted, the MacBook Air has always made some sense, but usually I recommend it more often than not to spend a bit more or wait until the MacBook Air is discounted, at which point the gap in price widens again. But now the gap is actually very reasonable. Why not 20 hours of battery? Probably because it doesn't reach 20 hours of battery. I mean, the MacBook Air is not designed to be entirely like a flagship in terms of battery life. It used to be that back in the day, but for example, the 14-inch MacBook Pro I'm sorry, has a 72 watt hour battery. The MacBook Air has a 53 watt hour battery, right? So the fact that they are even close, because obviously the MacBook Pro has faster performance a little bit because of its active cooling, the fan itself eats a little bit of energy, and the display is nicer. But overall, yeah, the MacBook Pro has a larger battery, but it also has nicer components in some way, but that's gonna cost you too. um, so up to 18 hours of battery life, 16 gigabytes of unified memory. That's of course something that Apple has already given retroactively to the M3 MacBook Air and the M2 MacBook Air when they introduced the M4 MacBook Pro. So this is not crazy. 12 megapixel center stage camera, lower starting price, and a new color, sky blue. This is very reminiscent of the iPhone 13 Pro color, the blue that we got there, Sierra blue. So looks really nice, honestly, to me. So what do we get in terms of quotes here? Greg Joswiak, Apple Senior Vice President Worldwide Marketing, saying MacBook Air is by far the world's most popular laptop. Yeah, it's interesting. The 13-inch MacBook Air was basically always the world's most powerful 13-inch laptop. Then they introduced the 15-inch MacBook Air, and that basically immediately became the world's most popular 15-inch laptop. So they definitely do have a reason to keep updating these things. Thin and light, still fanless design, all-day battery life, incredible capabilities of macOS Sequoia, and they've brought it down to the historic $999 starting price, which a lot of people have associated with the MacBook. They also actually did a pricing trick that I had suggested they do, but they also gave people who are willing to get a lesser configuration, an even cheaper version. I'll elaborate on that once we get there. So a fresh new hue, hello sky blue, that's cute. Nice. It's not the most vibrant color. So powerful 10-core CPU, up to 10-core GPU. The base version is binned, but if you get more storage, or if you get the 15-inch version, you get the full M4 chip. So that's quite nice. Some people had speculated maybe M4 uses too much power. Maybe Apple won't give it the fully unlocked processor. They are. What that will mean for the thermal performance and sustained performance levels, that remains to be seen. It features up to 32 gigs of memory, so that's nothing new as well. It's new for the MacBook Air, but it's similar to the M4 MacBook Pro, so which of course makes sense because it's the same chip. And when comparing to the fastest Intel-based MacBook Air, the M4 model delivers up to 23 times the performance. But yes, they are also still making comparisons to M1, doubling the performance. This is really the point where Apple is like saying, look, if you really want to upgrade from Intel, now is the time to do so. We gave you double the memory, right? We gave you now a lower entry starting price. If you want to spend more money, you can get something with a mini LED screen. You can get Pro and Max dice. You can get Thunderbolt 5. You can get up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory. You can get crazy long battery life on a 16-inch device. 1000 nits peak all-screen brightness, 1600 nits HDR brightness, 120 hertz, right? So we have now a little bit of everything to replace anything we ever had in terms of Intel devices, right? Yes, for example, the MacBook Air might not get like a big screen upgrade. And honestly, at this price point, I wouldn't be too shocked if the M5 version didn't change much there either. I would honestly expect Apple more to give you like maybe finally more base storage next generation, and but this screen is definitely not going away if Apple has its way. The powerful neural engine, blah blah blah. So these uplifts are nothing new to us. We of course discussed the same ones when we talked about the M4 MacBook Pro. Here are some comparisons with M1 and Intel devices, which actually interesting when comparing the Mac Studio, right? Apple was always bringing up the M1 Max or M1 Ultra first. Here they are bringing up Intel actually first. For 5 years, they didn't stop to say the MacBook Air has a great 18-hour battery life. Well, what is the exact battery life of the M2? So compare. Let's look. The MacBook Air, MacBook Air 15-inch, and let's look at the MacBook Air M2 with 13 inches. That one had how much battery life? That also had 18 hours of battery life. I like iMovie. I won't tolerate iMovie slander on this channel. iMovie is like a nice basic video editor and it's free. What's there to complain about? M2, that's the 15-inch version. And if we go to the 13-inch, oh, that's the MacBook Pro. Where's the MacBook Air? Here's Intel 2020, Intel 2017. Okay, that's definitely interesting. Yeah, the battery life itself is not actually like longer. They're just advertising it, I guess, to people who like didn't get the message yet. But yeah, if you're on an M1 or M2 MacBook Air, it's not a reason to upgrade. By the way, where's the M3 MacBook Air? Yeah, there it is. M3. Okay, so yeah, the battery life was already 18 hours. Maybe they improved some other battery life parameters of it. I mean, they can compare Final Cut Pro, but this is honestly where I have to tell you guys, you really have to strap yourself in to not get too excited about like specific things like, oh, what, like, why are they comparing this and not that? Are they lying? Well, the answer to that is that a lot of people who are buying the MacBook Air probably are very fine with iMovie as a video editor over Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro costs 1/3 the price of this MacBook Air itself. Right? Of course, it's targeting a different audience. I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more Excel benchmarks or just benchmarks of Office 365. Really asking, is the 120 hertz display happening next year? Honestly, after seeing the price reduction, I would say no. That's my honest answer. Like, I could see them giving it like a slightly brighter screen of like 600 nits rather than 500. But honestly, they basically have two value things to add to the MacBook Air, both of which can become dangerous to the MacBook Pro. One is doubling the storage to 512 gigabytes, right, which currently is still $200. Yes, you get a few more things like the fully unbinned processor and a nicer charger and stuff like that, but it's still $200. And the other thing is 120 hertz. Even if you ignore mini LED or like the capabilities of like HDR or XDR, that's the term I was looking for. By the way, I don't need the headphones right now. Not even sure why I put them in my ears. But like, I don't think that we're getting 120 hertz next year. Not at $999. Then maybe DaVinci. No, the point, DaVinci Resolve is also a professional video editor. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a much more difficult to use app than iMovie. That's the point. Yes, iMovie is free, and I know DaVinci Resolve has like a free entry-level version, but that's really not the main comparison. The main comparison is the difficulty of the software. If you are a DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut user, you should really get a MacBook Pro. In fact, you should probably be getting the M4 Pro MacBook Pro. So yes, I know all of this stuff will run on the MacBook Air, and it won't run too bad on it either. But the main thing that you want in those apps is you want really reliable, high sustained performance, and that's something that on the MacBook Air, with its smaller battery and its lack of active cooling, might suffer in comparison to the more expensive, even entry level MacBook Pro. But let's see how, again, Apple covers it. So iMovie, 8 times faster than Intel-based MacBook, 2 times faster than M1. Photoshop, 2 times faster than M1, 3.6 times faster than Intel. Web browsing is 60% faster when compared to a PC laptop with an Intel Core Ultra 7 processor. Interesting. So which chip did they use? Number one. Do they Intel Core i7? No, i7 is old. No, they do not specify which one. The fan, OLED, etc. Well, OLED is supposedly coming to the MacBook Air like a year or so after the MacBook Pro. So that leaves us in like 2027 at the earliest, maybe like 2028. I know some people who use a Pro Video Editor and MacBook Air. Yes, but they're a small niche. That's the point. Like, of course, there will always be a subset of people who use their devices in ways they aren't quite advertised for. I know, I am one of those people. But to me, like, that's still, like, Apple could bring up Final Cut, and I wouldn't be obviously against them bringing up Final Cut here. Let's see. I mean, they bring up Photoshop, but the main things like photo editing is more common on MacBook Airs than it is than video editing is. Basic video editing is way more common than professional video editing, and office workloads and web browsing are way more common use workloads on those kinds of devices than any kind of photo or video or music editing. Yeah, again, this is not to say that you should ignore those workloads, but for those workloads, you also can check out any like third-party benchmark. There's only so many tests Apple will show you on their website. Built for Apple Intelligence. I'm gonna skip this. There's nothing new here. Always camera ready, 12 megapixel center stage camera. Obviously, that gives you like the ability to follow you around. It can also give you an ultra wide view that goes down to like your palm rest area on your laptop, but also nicely enough, even for like your regular like 16:9, like full HD or 1440p video, it actually still gives you nicer quality because it's a larger sensor than it was before. So even if you don't need stage manager, even if you don't need center stage, judging from how well it worked on the MacBook Pro, you are getting also a nicer camera experience in general. Next is enhanced display support. So this is something that's, of course, part of the M4 chip in general. That's something we have talked about on the M4 MacBook Pro as well. Multi-display support. MacBook Air now supports up to two 6K external display in addition to its built-in Liquid Retina display. So, of course, if you had an M3 MacBook, you know you could connect to two external displays simultaneously, but you would have to close your laptop lid, basically use like your own display engine then for one of the external displays. Now it has enough controllers to handle two external displays and its own display, but it does still only come with two Thunderbolt 4 ports. So if you want the third one, that's where you go to the MacBook Pro. And then the rest is just very common. 500 nits, 1 billion colors. So we are looking definitely on an inferior panel in comparison to what is offered on the MacBook Pro. Touch ID, 13 and 15-inch choices, connectivity. I mean, it has MagSafe. Whoop-de-doo. Still doesn't have Wi-Fi 7. Supposedly Wi-Fi 7 is just like coming with Apple's own modems at the end of the year for the iPhone 17 family. Maybe Apple will make a pretty quick update of their Macs as well at that point, giving it their own modem, but it's not at least happening right now. 3 microarray three-dimensional sound stage. They do not mention how many speakers. I hope there are no downgrades. There is talk that there is a bass downgrade on the iPad Air, right? So it still has dual speakers, but it doesn't have dual bass speakers. So not sure honestly about that. So hopefully there are no downgrades like that here. But they do not. Like, why do they not mention something like the fact that the 15-inch version has like a 6-speaker setup? Come on, Apple. And macOS Sequoia, and better for the environment. Okay, so nothing crazy here. Guys, we have so many people watching. Please, if you haven't yet done so, like the video. That helps tremendously with the algorithm, helps us find more people to watch us, helps us grow the community. So please do that. If you're liking the content, please subscribe to the channel, share the video out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and comment. You see, I love interacting with your lively comment section, getting your questions, your agreements, your disagreements, your content suggestions. So that's very much appreciated. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Max Maximus, and Steve, who are MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. However you choose to support us, it's all very, very appreciated. Francisco Mombelli, after looking at these upgrades, do you believe it's worth to pay $400 to buy the M4 base chip MacBook Pro? This is a fantastic question. Because we did kind of talk about the actual announcements, so we might actually get to the nitty-gritty of what do I recommend, what do I think is interesting, what do I think is bad, right? So the comparison here is actually quite nice, because the price reduction also applies, by the way, to the 15-inch version. The previous 15-inch version started at $12.99. So looking at the M4 MacBook Pro with the M4, okay? So obviously the starting prices here are $1,000, $1,200, and $1,600 respectively. You choose between 13.6, 15.3 and 14.2 inch displays. The MacBook Pro kind of fitting in the middle there. But of course, we've covered multiple times that this is a better screen, it's brighter, it's more responsive, it's 120 hertz, it has superior XDR handling. So definitely, if you care about the screen, and especially if you can get this for maybe like $1,500, right? Because at this point, you do see more regular discounts, especially on the M4 Pro MacBook Pro, I would argue, but still also on the base level MacBook Pro. So yeah, then I definitely think it's worth it. I will say one thing. If you are completely okay with 256 gigabytes of storage, I highly recommend you just get a MacBook Air, right? If you know you won't fill up your storage drive, spend less money now, and maybe if your needs really change down the line, you can get a MacBook Pro or a Mac Studio or whatever your heart desires. If you do want 512 gigabytes or more, because that obviously increases this to $1,200, then I would argue you only consider the MacBook Pro. But if you think about the MacBook Pro and you're like, oh, I won't fill up even half of its 512 gigabytes SSD, then just don't buy it, right? That's one part of my recommendation. If you really care about the screen, honestly, I think the $400 difference is worth it. As somebody who himself uses a mini LED 120 hertz ProMotion M1 Max MacBook Pro, in fact, I also have like better display installed, so I can actually drive it up to 1600 nits of brightness, or at least like 1000 nits of all screen brightness. It's basically a hack which Apple offers directly on the M4 MacBooks, thanks to by using a quantum dot OLED screen, which is more efficient, more responsive. So they combined that with the backlight and made it even brighter by default. So that's a recommendation. Mac Mini looking like a real good value now. I mean, the Mac Mini versus the MacBook Air, in my opinion, they make just the kind of sense they do. I think don't forget, the Mac Mini is $600, right? It's 16 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. And with the MacBook Air, you get basically that exact performance. You get like one GPU core less. It's really not that big of a deal. You get a screen, camera, speakers, microphones, keyboard, trackpad, right? I don't think the Mac Mini blows this MacBook Air completely out of the water. And don't forget, most people have way more use for a laptop than they have even the tiniest and cutest desktop. But let's get back to actually the value. So, first consideration, storage. If you feel like you don't need more than 256 gigabytes, don't really think about the MacBook Pro. Invest as little money as you can right now and better wait for like some even more interesting tech down the line. But if you want 512 gigabytes or more, at which point the price difference drops to $400, then first consideration is, do I really want a better screen? And to me, it depends how much you want one, but to me, it's definitely worth it to anybody who is like enough of a tech enthusiast to like come to my channel and watch me live, right? I know that's kind of like an arbitrary criteria, but it's unironically a good one while we are all like sitting here together. So that's one thing. When it comes to performance, honestly, only if you actually use pro apps, right? So the amount of max memory is the same. The amount of max storage is the same. Yes, you get better battery life, but honestly, you're looking at battery life that is way more than enough to last you through the day. So this is honestly the kind of battery life difference, even if it's technically 1/3 more, right? This is like 33% more, but it won't really dramatically redefine your use case. Plus, you will tend to use this at a higher display brightness just because you can. So you might equalize the battery life in the end anyway. Sure, you will have a nicer experience here, but now you also paid for that nicer experience with at least $400 more. So compute, we are starting here with... why does it say up to 10 core GPU? I want to know how much it's binned. Pre-order 13-inch. Oh, it's 8 core GPUs. Okay. So and if I get it with 512, you get both. You get the full 10 core GPU. Okay, so if you max performance, what do I say here? With student discounts, we can have the MacBook Air M4 with 24 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, 10-core CPU, 10-core GPU, or pay $300 more for a MacBook Pro M4 base. To be honest, though, why would you upgrade the memory before you upgrade the storage on the MacBook Air? That would be a little bit weird to me. But yeah, the base proposition is the same. But you also get the discount on the MacBook Pro education. It's not excluded from education pricing. Do you get special education pricing outside of Apple specifically for the MacBook Air? Because Apple offers education prices across all their laptops. So for performance, honestly, if you game, I have to say M4 MacBook Pro. But honestly, this is like a niche recommendation because I know most people gaming will not really use a Mac as their gaming product. But who knows, maybe you're just like you want to run all the new Assassin's Creed games and Cyberpunk, right? 2 more GPU cores, the more responsive VR display, the nicer image in general from the mini LED screen. It could be worth it, but it's a very niche recommendation. When you upgrade to 512 gigabytes, you get a double charger free. I know, but like that double charger is like, realistically, it's $15 extra over the charger that's already there. Like, yes, I know. You get the fully unbinned chip. you get the nicer charger, and you get the actual storage increase. So this is how Apple gets away with charging $200 for 256 gigabytes of storage, which is funny because they still charge the same $200 for storage on Macs, on iPads and iPhones, even going down to like the iPhone 16e and the A16 iPad. And on those devices, they don't like suddenly include a charger in the box or some kind of other accessories, and they don't even unbin the chips. So on the Macs, you actually get better value, which to me suggests that Apple sees the Mac market as much more competitive than the smartphone or tablet markets. I was looking to buy one with 1 terabyte, and in that case, I think it's worth to buy the MacBook Pro. That I agree with. So this is one thing. So my base recommendation is, if you, I should have clarified that. So if you want 512 gigabytes, right? Now you consider all of those devices, right? These devices, right? MacBook Air small, MacBook Air large, MacBook Pro. But if you want 1 terabyte or more, then I would say in general it's better for to get the MacBook Pro. Usually, especially because the MacBook Pro also launches earlier, you will get it at like a nice discount over a site like Amazon. I believe Oni-chan is your name. I've slept for a whole afternoon, and when I wake up and I saw that 512 gigabytes of unified memory, I thought I was not awake. Well, you are awake, brother. We all woke together, and we are going through it. One of the most crazy things Apple has done recently. Yeah, it's crazy, especially the mix, since it's like, you would look at the M3 Ultra and you would kind of think, oh, that's kind of disappointing, right? But it has Thunderbolt 5, and it has, like the previous M2 Ultra maxed out at 192 gigabytes. This one maxes out at 512. The M4 Max, even in this Mac Studio, maxes out at 128. So even if you're unhappy about the M3 Ultra not having the single core performance of the M4 Max, or having not the same media encoders and stuff like that, you're still looking at something that has a very unique package. So you think it's better to get 512 gigabytes SSD instead of 24 gigs of RAM? For the vast majority of people, I do. Don't forget that all systems, but Macs, use your storage as a little bit like a RAM buffer. And the more you, like, yes, the more RAM you have, the less your storage is taxed that way. But if you have even like, if you fill up your storage, SSDs get a little bit slower if you fill them up. So if you're somebody who uses only 100, 150 gigabytes, honestly, no difference between 256 and 512. If you're filling up over 200 gigabytes, there could be a difference. And once you then also get into some memory constraint scenarios, now 512 gigabytes doesn't just give you faster raw speeds, but it actually impacts how much memory, I know it's not technically memory, but how much of it you have. They increased the price of upgrading to 1 terabyte on MacBook Pro in some countries, I think. Yeah, this is honestly not surprising to me because currencies have been really hit hard. Like the euro just gained like 2-3% finally against the dollar after like dropping 10-15%. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw small currency fluctuations like that. And Apple is really unwilling to change base prices. I saw that yesterday with the A16 iPad, where they kept the base pricing despite doubling the storage, having a 2-generation newer chip, right? Now with the MacBook Air, they dropped the base pricing, which, by the way, this is one thing that I wanted to mention. No, not the Mac Studio. The MacBook Air, right? So I have historically said when the MacBook Air used to be $1099 and had 256 gigs of storage, my suggestion to Apple was Apple, could you please give us 512 gigs of storage? At that point, you could actually justify a small price increase, right? Not the $200 that you charge for more storage usually, but maybe $100. And you know what? That's what they did. And in that, they also give you the unbinch and the better charger, making this package actually a better value than what I suggested Apple should do. Granted, I suggested that even before the launch of the M4 MacBook Pro, so maybe the sales of the MacBook Airs have not been going as well as Apple hoped. I assume Apple has a very good supply chain for these components, right? Like the 60 hertz screen, this body without the fan and stuff like that. So I really think that Apple actually likes selling a lot of MacBook Airs because their profit margins might not even be that much smaller than on the much more expensive MacBook Pro. The components here are a lot cheaper. Talking about weights and planning to take it with me to university, do you think the weight difference is notable? No. As somebody who himself has a 14-inch MacBook Pro, I think unless you have like some degenerative muscle disease, which isn't a joke, some people have it, right? I would just recommend just don't care about that specifically. Yeah, but yeah. So for one, I recommend getting more storage here over getting 24 gigs of memory, specifically because more storage also gives you more performance. But once you want even more storage than that, go with the MacBook Pro. If you really should have the right comparison. If you really value screens, go with the MacBook Pro. If you really need the highest possible sustained performance, but at that point, you should really also know what you're using it for. Specifically in that regard, I would say if you're like doing pro apps, Xcode, Final Cut, Logic, Premiere, DaVinci, even Photoshop, probably not so much, but like then the M4 the M4 MacBook Pro makes sense. Kev Chat, I haven't seen you in a while too. I have 2015 MacBook Pro with about 70 gigabytes. I want to transfer over to MacBook. Which MacBook would you recommend? Well, every Mac in existence right now, based on Apple Silicon, will be an upgrade for you. It depends a little bit what kind of MacBook you had, right? Like 2015 doesn't tell me what size you had or what chip it had. But in general, for most people, the MacBook Air is more than fine. Also increase the RAM, give you 2 extra GPU. Yeah. The upgrade here is honestly not unreasonable. What's funny is, of course, that with the MacBook Air 15-inch, you also get some of those nicer upgrades, like the fully unbinned chip, the nicer charger. But that 15-inch version, of course, that one actually I've heard in terms of size. Yeah, like the MacBook Pro 14-inch might be thicker, but the 15-inch might legit be harder to fit in certain desks. So if you have a university hall with like really small like desks, or you're traveling a lot on the plane or the train, and like those little desks that like those chair thingies, right? You might actually want to stick with a 13-inch MacBook Air or a 14-inch MacBook Pro rather than go all the way up to the 15-inch Air. I have MacBook Air M1, 8 gigabytes, 256 gigabytes. No, I don't think M1 users should upgrade right now at all, unless you're actually limited by some of the things that are inside, specifically the memory, most likely. Should you upgrade to the M3? I assume because you can get a much better deal with the 16 gigabyte version, to the M3 version with 16 gigabytes and 512 gigs of storage. If you can get a decent resale value for your M1 MacBook Air, which might be the last year where you can actually get a really good value for it, because don't forget, at this point, 8 gigs of RAM is really frowned upon in the resale market. Next year, 256 gigabytes might follow that. So if you can resell your M1 MacBook Air at a decent price, go for the M3 or the M4 version. Get more memory, get more storage, so you actually feel some difference. But if you can still make it work, keep it. Keep it for another year. Who knows what we'll get next year? And maybe by that time you can get an M3 or M4 MacBook Pro for the money that you would usually like associate with a MacBook Air, right? By the time the M5 MacBook Pro comes out, maybe the M3 MacBook Pro just gets like to $1,000. I actually upgraded from M1 MacBook Air to M4 MacBook Pro. That's great. Yeah, because in this case, you didn't just upgrade from a generation to another generation, but you also upgraded from one class of device to another. You upgraded from Air to Pro. You get mini LED screens, you get the better performance, sustained performance, you get even longer battery life. Yeah, that makes total sense. Upright tray tables are pretty small, you're right. Thanks. Yeah, it's good that I remember that because I've been on a few trains recently. MacBook Air M3 and M4 have the same battery life. Why shouldn't M4 be more efficient? M4 is more efficient, but has higher peak performance across CPU and GPU. That's why if you completely equalize their performance levels, let's say to the level of the M3, then the M4 will give you longer battery life. But the M4 will give you the same battery life with a snappier everyday performance experience. Michael Lee, pretty exactly in my case, now doing a consideration on a refurbished 16-inch MacBook Pro with M4 Pro instead of a 14-inch. Yeah, exactly. Now, and whenever you're looking at like refurbished markets, I can recommend you a lot less because that will depend a lot more on your specific like market. What can you actually get for refurbished and stuff like that? So, but yeah, I highly recommend you guys look for that stuff too. Chen Ken saying this M4 is nerfed version. Just as it was, just as the M3 was nerfed on the previous MacBook Air. This is one thing that I've actually had a friend of mine say, like, wait until people complain that the M4 is bent on the MacBook Air. And I'm like, wait, but the M3 was bent on the MacBook Air too. And he is like, yeah, but people will ignore that. So yeah, the M4 MacBook Air is bent, but only with its GPU. So that's 2 GPU cores down, but only on the cheapest MacBook Air. So that's on the 13-inch version with 256 gigabytes of storage. The second you get more storage, you also get the nicer charger, going from a 30-watt single charger to a 35-watt dual-port charger, and you get the fully unbent chip, going from an 8-core GPU M4 to a 10-core GPU M4. You also get the full M4 chip right away on the 15-inch version. So, and plus the nicer charger. So on the MacBook Air 15-inch, upgrading the storage is actually unironically lower value than it is on the MacBook Air. So that's a bit funny. Jesus, I must have drank almost a liter since I started the stream. Guys, we have double more of you watching than we have likes. Please leave a like. It helps tremendously with the algorithm. I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't that important. So thank you so much for coming in such large numbers, helping us grow the community. You guys see, I love giving you advice. And if you really want me to read out your chats, because we are getting a lot of chats at this point, consider making it a super chat. Can be a small one, and I will just follow up whatever you write afterwards. But yeah, any kind of support is appreciated, but likes and super chats are the next consideration for you guys. How do you feel about the M3 iPad Airs? This is honestly one thing that to me has been kind of baffling across the board, which is when I look at the YouTubers, right? The YouTubers, but I mean like all YouTubers, I guess. M3 iPad Air. And you'll find a ton of videos. Oh, it's German, please. But like, I guess if I click on Max Tech, they had the video. Apple just announced here. So, and best value iPad for I believe they changed the thumbnail yesterday. They called this the A16 iPad Genius, and they said about the M3 iPad Air, like basically what was Apple thinking. And to me, it's like the M3 iPad Air is just a simple, like, plug and play, like, replace the M2 chip with the M3 chip. Maybe there's a small speaker downgrade. I cannot speak to that yet, unfortunately. Guys, thank you so much for the likes coming in. But when people complain about this, it's like it's an upgrade that happened after 10 months. Don't forget that with the iPad Air M2, we got the repositioned camera, we got support for Apple Pencil Pro, we got the 13-inch version, and we got Wi-Fi 6E, and we got 128 gigabytes as base storage. Now, they should have probably always been base ever since the M1 iPad Air, but that's just the things that happened like 10 months ago. I'm just curious when people say like, oh, this is like the most boring iPad upgrade ever. I mean, yeah, but what did you expect? It's like a small spec bump. Like, do you want the M4 in it? For what reason? You are the same people who have complained, and by you, I don't mean you, my audience, but like I look at YouTubers, you have complained for years that iPadOS does not take advantage of the high power ceiling of Apple Silicon processors. Well, guess what? They didn't give it the fastest processor, so why are you complaining again? What would be the most sensible buy Air for an average user in order to have no issues on future updates? I would argue, depending on your battery life needs, because I've seen some people go specifically for the 15-inch version because in real world it gives you like a little bit more battery life. I would argue 13-inch version with 512 gigabytes, but 16 gigs of RAM is plenty. Plus, you get the fully unbinned chip. Again, the nicer charger. I mention it. I'm not delusional. I know it's a very, very small part of the value equation. But yeah, MacBook Air, 13-inch, 512 gigabytes. That's basically all you need. I heard on Reddit someone said old MacBook in to get battery replaced, received new MacBook. Yeah, that happens occasionally. It happens when Apple might not have that kind of battery again, but it's relatively rare. It's really something you see on Reddit rather than like even on Apple's forums because it's just not that common. I expected 2 times base on the Air 13-inch. Lol. Yeah, like. It's like people will like complain about stuff that they themselves will never use. So it's always like a difficult balance between pleasing like tech enthusiast YouTubers versus making cheaper entry-level products that more people will buy in the average anyway. So yeah, you can see it as you want. The iPad Air is toy for media consumption. My iPad Air M1 256 gigs is enough for me. I mean, the iPad is not a toy. I use my iPad Pro for plenty of non-toy stuff. But media consumption, this is one thing, by the way, that I really dislike. When people are like, oh, media consumption is like, it's something for the cheap market, right? Like, oh, the iPad Pro with its tandem OLED screen, right? You don't need that. Of course, you don't need it to watch a Netflix video, but people pay sometimes tens of thousands of dollars for a TV, definitely thousands of dollars, and definitely close to $1,000. My own TV was $2,400. It's a 65-inch LG OLED. For exactly media consumption, be it gaming, and even then, those TVs don't game at all by themselves. You connect them to a PC or a console. So I always wonder when we look at something like the iPad Pro, for example, right? And people will say, oh, it's just a media consumption device, $1,000, $1,300 is way too much. I'm like, but it's a very, very nice media consumption device. You know that some people might have already like work products from work. There might be people who make like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month. To them, there is functionally no difference between an $800 13-inch iPad Air and a $1,300, depending on specification, iPad Pro. So this is where, but they will want like the OLED screen. They will be like, oh, my TV is OLED. I like OLED. Reading is easier on OLED. HDR is nicer on OLED, right? So this is why I also don't like downplaying devices by calling them just like, oh, they're media consumption. Media consumption is something people pay a lot of money for. Blue Gamer, will the M4 Air be good enough for programming using Emacs/NeoVim and other terminal tools? I don't use any video editing software. I like that it's fanless. I'm not familiar with the specific tools. You would have to look up how does the MacBook Pro with the M4 perform in those apps, right? I hope that there is data on that in general. And usually you won't have to, at least in coding, you don't have to like take away 10, 15, 20% of performance. You get almost the same peak performance for coding on a MacBook Air as you get on the MacBook Pro, maybe 5 to 10% less. So especially if you get, well, granted, the GPU core count doesn't really impact coding, so you could even get the base version if you really felt like it. But yeah, in this case, I really would say, if the M4 MacBook Pro was enough for it, so will the MacBook Air. However, in general, whenever somebody takes like this stuff very seriously, I usually recommend getting the binned M4 Pro version. Those are also the devices that are most likely to get discounts on other websites. Specifically, we usually had that with the M2 MacBook Pro, I remember, where if you go with, where is it? That's the M4. I need the M4 Pro. Here, if you go like for this version, let's even say you want 1 terabyte or something like that. But these versions will usually have like disproportionately larger discounts. Like they will have full-on $200, $250 discounts on sites like Amazon. And at that point, they might make more sense to you than even an M4 MacBook Pro. Though, obviously, if you could afford those, you probably wouldn't be looking too much into the MacBook Air. So always make that stuff dependent on your own like financials. I agree, iPad Pro is good. For me, iPad Air is great. Oh, iPad Air is cool too. I'm just saying that, for one, iPads are so much more than just media consumption. But even if they were simply media consumption, by the way, media is books, it's movies, it's TV shows, it's music, it's gaming, right? Those are huge markets. So I wasn't even complaining about what you said, Astuces. I was just trying to, if Astuces, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. There are many names in my chat that are not Tom, Mike, and John. But I really dig that. I really dig that. Like anybody who knows like my real like surname knows that my last name is also funny. So I really dig the fact that we have an international audience. Thank you guys so much for tuning from all over the world. It really means the world to me. Let's actually check if we might have missed anything, right? Because whenever stuff like this happens, there's always like important to also look at other stuff. So Apple no longer sells a space gray Mac as color drops to just 2 new products. What? Wait, how much does the what colors is the MacBook Air? It's sky blue, it's silver, it's starlight, and it's midnight. Oh, midnight was always a way better color than space gray. Go F space gray. Never liked it too much. I mean, I have a space gray MacBook Pro, and it's not bad, right? I do prefer it over silver, but if I could have back in the day gotten a midnight one, I would have. So, so let's look at Mac rumors. Apple explains why the new Mac Studio doesn't have an M4 Ultra chip. Oh my God. That's actually crazy. When asked why the high-end Mac studio was getting an M3 Ultra chip instead of an M4 Ultra, Apple told us that not every chip generation will get an Ultra tier. That's hilarious. So why bring it out now and not before that? Perhaps that means we will never get an M4 Ultra chip. Apple explanations lead us to wonder which chip the next Mac Pro desktop tower will use. Guys, could it be that we will now get an M5 Ultra Mac Pro by the end of the year? I mean, think about it. If Apple has enough MacBooks to sell and enough Mac Studios to sell the M4 Max, they will not make it. They will not see the need to combine that and shit like that. So maybe they are just like, you know what? We're just going to ignore M4 Ultra. We had M3 Max dies lying around. Maybe M4 Ultra would have had severe scaling issues if we combined it over the same UltraFusion. That also shouldn't be forgotten. Those extra 15 to 20% more performance, even the faster memory that you get if you double the M4 Max, those might have become like the UltraFusion could have become a bottleneck. No, it wouldn't have been bottlenecked. It would have become a bottleneck for those components. So maybe the M3 Ultra being at least slightly more closer to the M2 Ultra legitimately made more sense. And maybe by the time they make an M5 Ultra, they will have a completely new Ultra Connect with like double, triple the bandwidth, even better low latency. But yeah, so it's very interesting. But I mean, this is a very short response. But it's still an interesting one. By the way, guys, I'm not trying to extort you, but if you really, really need me to read your message, a small super chat would be needed because at this point the chat is just getting way too big. Mark, I'm about to buy my first Apple product in my life. I currently own a Samsung flagship smartphone. I'd like to buy a laptop, and I'm just doing my homework on ARM4 and maybe 16 gig, 512 gig. Great combination. You will know if you really need more than that, right? You can kind of ascertain from your current PC usage. I don't assume this is your first PC of any kind, right? At that point, if you are already filling up terabytes of storage, yeah, probably consider getting more storage. If you're working on ultra large 3D files or working with some kind of even entry-level LLMs, now consider getting more memory. But usually you know that stuff. You don't need me to tell you that, right? If you're somebody just coming in saying you want your device for homework and stuff like that, 16 gigs, 512 gigs, great combo. Refresh Mac rumors. They confirmed M4 Max has no UltraFusion. Wait, is there a die shot completely? M4 Ultra chip. Apple confirms the M4 Max chip lacks UltraFusion. Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. Well, this is probably a separate interview, right? No. Wait, did they not link to the to learn? Did they not link to the article where they're taking it from? Told French technology website Numenarama. Okay. Open link. Okay. Guys, give me 1 second. Always like to make my screen myself big for a moment while I do something that could potentially... Oh, translate to English is right there. Thank you guys so much. This is why I love getting your input right away. For studio laptop 16512 is way to go. Yeah, guys, I love that you're also helping each other. And while I still have so many of you here, please leave a like. It helps tremendously. Help us get us over 30 likes. So this is announced on March 5th, 2025. The new Mac Studio goes from M2 Max and M2 Ultra chips to M4 Max and M3 Ultra chips. An incomprehensible choice for the general public who will have to choose between a powerful 4th-gen chip and an even more powerful 3rd-gen chip. True. The incomprehensible choice of today is signed by Apple. 2 times M3 Max is more than 1 M4 Max. That's all. Okay, those comparisons make sense. Apple justifies its choice. The M4 Ultra chip will not be able to exist in its current form. How to explain Apple's choice? The brand has a very simple justification, which regulars of computer assembly had already discovered. There are no UltraFusion connectors on the M4 Max chip. It is therefore impossible to merge two fourth generation chips to create an M4 Ultra. Okay, so that I guess means that the Mac Pro is pretty much guaranteed to get M5 Ultra, right? Because I mean, if they're coming out and commenting on that, right? That would be crazy. Apple with the has strengthened its financial. Okay, so I doubt that this is a new die, because I mean they're saying Apple explains to Numerama that Thunderbolt 5's backwards compatibility with the M3 architecture has strengthened its final choice. It is useless to waste for a chip that does not exist if the M3 Ultra is already the most powerful chip in its history. The time to renew Mac Studio was here. Honestly, it was then way earlier, but okay. If it had waited longer for an M4 Ultra, might have been forced to sell its device at a much higher price. M3 Extremist, that one is fun. Will there be an M4 Ultra chip one day? Apple could surprise. I doubt it. If they're coming out actually commenting on the architectural questions, I'm honestly surprised that they're doing this. So I would just say, to me, it just screams that the next time we'll see an Ultra chip, it is going to be M5 Ultra. And honestly, at that point, it's really a question of what are they gonna put it in, right? Is it coming only to the Mac Pro, and then we'll have to wait for M6 Ultra on the Mac Studio? Is it coming right away to Mac Pro and Mac Studio at the end of the year? Is it coming by the end of the year to the Mac Pro, and then by some point mid-2026 to the Mac Studio? Right? Those are all very interesting questions at this point. Digital Tech Traveler, isn't there a brand new Hydra chip designed for the Mac Pro coming? All of this is very, very speculative. All of this stuff can be delayed for years and years. I know we've had like rumors that Apple might make something like an external GPU and stuff like that. But honestly, I just wouldn't bet on any of those things, right? Because it's really like a hard sell. Like when you have like individual rumor pieces, and some of them get delayed, some of them get canceled, some of them change their very nature. So don't ever build like your expectations on rumors. This exact Mac Studio, right, with an M4 Max and an M3 Ultra, it was teased yesterday for the very first time by Mark Gurman. Previously, Mark Gurman said it might take us closer to like WWDC to even get a Mac Studio. And he definitely didn't talk about the discrepancy of M4 Max, M3 Ultra before that. So whenever you're working sometimes with years old rumors, they might be like so wrong at this point. Just don't base your expectations on that. The formidable Centurions wouldn't be surprised that Apple already had M10 figured out, but it's all slow business. Usually, the expectation is that 3 generations ahead or 3 years ahead, which could be more like 2.5 generations, a company's already working on it, right? So Apple at this point is probably in the very early stages of doing some M7 development, but they're definitely already very far along with M6 development, and M5 is probably getting validated and tested. So this is how you should see it. M10, definitely not. Too much stuff can change in 6 to 7 years. Sometimes nodes like fabrication nodes by companies like TSMC and Intel, they can be planned and even like experimented with like a decade ahead. But that has nothing to do with mass production and stuff like that. Oh, my voice is slightly giving up. Okay, so that's a crazy piece of clarification for Apple. So they're basically saying M4 Max doesn't even have the interconnect. The M3 architecture apparently was Thunderbolt 5 was backwards compatible with M3, and that's why they ported it. It's interesting they do not talk about like, oh, our newer memory speeds were compatible with M3. They still used slower 6400 megatransfers, and I assume that the base setup of like the UltraFusion is the same one as the M2 Ultra. The memory speeds are the same. There are more cores definitely on the M3 Ultra than on the M2 Ultra, but at least the GPU is kind of comparable in size, right? So Apple thought, you know what, if we would do the same thing with M4, that would kind of really break the entire setup. We would have to create new interconnects. So at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if it takes us until the M5, until we get a really proper big leap when it comes to ultra chips. The Formidable Centurion subscribed. Thank you so much. Astuce's iOS. What if they do a new M4 Max chip like the M3 Max chip? The problem is the way they are wording is. I'm not sure if this is an entirely new M3 Max die. It could, for all intents and purposes, be an M3 Max die where Apple just said, you know what, Thunderbolt 5 works fine on it, right? Let us overclock the memory, the controllers we had previously for Thunderbolt 4, and they work just fine with Thunderbolt 5. I have no idea. Maybe they have some kind of extra chip there too on the motherboard that helps with like signal strength along the way, but I'm not sure. The way they're wording it, it just sounds like M3 Max was fine to go to be turned into M2 Ultra, to be turned into M4 Ultra, M3. To be turned into M3 Ultra, man. Between all the different Maxes, Pros, Ultras, it's really hard to keep track. Yeah, but definitely, thank you guys so much for pulling my attention towards this. So this is the reason why a maxed out M3 Ultra Max Studio will cost you $14,000. Yep, this is if you want to get it with 16 terabytes of storage, 512 gigabytes of unified memory. I would argue most people, even in this crazy market, will not be too interested in the highest end configuration, right? If we go with the Mac Studio right here, let us pre-order it for a moment. So it's same starting prices versus M2 Max and M2 Ultra previously. Come on, Apple. So let's say you want the full chip. Let's say you want 256 gigs of unified memory. Let's say you want 4 terabytes of storage. You probably can handle all other storage needs. And now it costs basically half of that crazy max pricing because yes, you can click on this and yes, you can click on that if you really feel like it. I don't really feel like you will need to do so. Yeah. What if, okay, so I've read now most messages. I feel good about that. Reload with reduced protections. So let's see if 95 Mac has anything more to say, or we've missed something in general. So RCS, don't really care about that. The M4 MacBook Air isn't an exciting update, but it's a good time to buy. So this is one thing that I've also see a lot in recent times, where people focus on how exciting an update is, rather than if a product is good, decent value, how it compares to the rest of the industry in the current state. This is something I see a lot. Guys, let me just briefly check something out. Just have to... Okay, So sorry, just had to check my work emails for the last time for today, because after 6 p.m. I'm not getting anything new. Why get a feeling that M4 Air is a slight improvement to its predecessor and Apple will probably discontinue it? Well, Apple did discontinue its predecessors, but I agree that Apple might target a single MacBook Air family going forward, because if the M5 after this, right, is like a sensible 10% CPU improvement, 25% GPU improvement, right? Let's say it has the same 4 plus 6 CPU cores. Let's say it has 12 GPU cores. Let's say it uses slightly faster memory, 8533. Maybe M5 Pro and M5 Max move over to even faster memory, maybe like 10,700 megatransfers per second memory, right? I don't think that the M4 MacBook Air would make too much sense to keep around. Sure, at $100 cheaper with the same configurations, it might make some sense, but that would also mean Apple would still have to source continuously M4 chips. N3P is better, probably a tiny bit more expensive than N3E. But it's not as monumentally more expensive as 3 nanometer was over 2 nanometer, which justified keeping an M2 MacBook Air and an M3 MacBook Air simultaneously in the lineup. Having 2 3 nanometer MacBook Airs might just not be the kind of differentiation that Apple wants in the future. And at that point, they will just discontinue the M4 MacBook Air, and the M5 MacBook Air might be a very small upgrade at that point. At that point, I would definitely expect it to introduce something like Wi-Fi 7 to the mix, right? It might be based on Apple's own modems at that point. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the M5, the base version, introduces Thunderbolt 5. What I could see happening is maybe instead of 2 Thunderbolt 4 controllers, maybe it has only 1 Thunderbolt 5 controllers. So it maxes out at the same 120 gigabits per second, but with only 2 ports sharing 1 controller. If you actually put in 2 accessories, those accessories might then run at Thunderbolt 4 speeds. And granted, given that very few accessories need anything close to Thunderbolt 4 speeds, you probably could run into one direction a 120 gigabits per second display, and then on the other port you could be running a 40 gigabit per second dock or storage hub or something like that, and you would still be fine, right? And you would still end up with the combined 160 gigabytes per second that you get from Thunderbolt 5. So yeah, those are the kind of changes that I could see Apple introducing on an M5 MacBook Air without breaking the bank, either for themselves by increasing build cost, or for you by making it so much better that suddenly it's worth almost as much as the MacBook Pro. I don't see, for example, the screen changing. Maybe we'll finally get 512 gigabytes of base storage. That I could see as a difference. Maybe if M5 MacBook Air starts with 512, maybe Apple will raise prices again, keep the M4 at $899, and then the M5 starts at $1099. But those decisions, honestly, I don't think they're made yet. They will be made in 6, 7, 8 months or something like that. Maybe even later. So MacBook Airs. Apple launches M3 Ultra. Apple unveils MacBook Air. Yeah, I don't think that the way we are going through all the details, going through Apple's newsroom reports, I honestly doubt that that these websites can do so much more than what we can discuss based on Apple stuff. However, they can better link to stuff like external information, like Apple, for some reason officially coming out and confirming that the M4 Max doesn't have UltraFusion, and even alluding to the fact that not every M series generation will get an ultra tier processor. So those are both very interesting and big statements. Guys, we're missing 1 like to 30 likes. So if you feel like doing that would be a big help. Let me see. Okay, it's or we are missing 2 likes. I'm not sure. It just went down by 1 like. Sorry, I'm so freaking thirsty today. Let's see if Apple. Let's actually look at the exact pricing here, right? Let's look at the pricing of the MacBook Air for a moment. So pre-order, and I'll be able to 30 likes. We hit it. Thank you to the Formidable Centurions and to Lost in Translation podcast. Thank you so much. So I've already said this upgrade makes a lot of sense to me, and this is the upgrade I recommend most of you take. Dual USB-C port charger, slightly faster peak charging, fully enabled M4 chip, 10-core CPU, 10-core GPU, and of course, more storage. And as I alluded to, while yes, storage does not equal memory, storage can help with memory. 24 gigs of memory, honestly, this is where my recommendation comes in. If you really need that kind of memory, you're probably looking more towards the M4 MacBook Pro, or even I would argue the M4 Pro MacBook Pro, which starts at 24 gigabytes. Granted, you would have to pay $600 more for it, or even with a heavy discount, like $400 more, but usually that is my recommendation. If you really see yourself needing more than 16 gigabytes of memory, I'm recommending you move away from the MacBook Air. Looking at all pricing, 32, okay, so the upgrades between storage and RAM are the same as they've always been. This is one thing I keep mentioning, like, for one, the price discount versus the M3 MacBook Air already surprised me. I'm not surprised that Apple is keeping the same storage upgrades and RAM upgrade prices. With stuff like tariffs right now, currency fluctuations, uncertainty in international trades, they will keep their margins as high as they would want it. Also, 70 watt, this is a free upgrade, so if you feel like it, you can do this one versus this one. I would argue that Apple probably should just unify these two into one 70-watt dual USB-C port charger. At that point, its inclusion over a simple 30-watt charger would actually more than justify that $200. But yeah, it's not a big deal. Like I myself, I always charge my MacBook with like my 100-watt charger. Obviously, that is one port, but I also do have my Anker 3-port charger that maxes out at 100 watts, has 2 USB-C charging ports and 1 USB-A charging port. So just if you want to know about my user behavior. When it comes to the 15-inch version, there's nothing crazy to recommend here. Again, 512 gigabytes. Just get more storage. As I said before, this upgrade is legitimately lower value because on the base model, you already get the better charger and the fully enabled chip. The only thing I can recommend here is you actually get that 70-watt charger because you can benefit from slightly faster peak charging on the 15-inch MacBook Air. And then, of course, if you want to consider the new Mac Studio, obviously, if you guys feel like it, I can also give you recommendations for the MacBook Pro and stuff like that. But let's start with the products that were actually introduced today. So here, for most people, I just recommend people stick with M4 Max. If you are somebody who knows you can utilize M3 Ultra, then you probably don't need me to tell you that you need an M3 Ultra. If you know you can leverage 256 or even 512 gigabytes of storage, if you don't, of RAM, sorry, if you really don't want to deal with any external storage and you feel like getting 16 terabytes right on device, you know who you are, you have so much fuck me money that you don't need me to tell you. But looking at the M4 Max, this is honestly, in my opinion, very interesting. So I would recommend, given the relative small percentage, you do have to pay obviously more, because you are getting 12 gigabytes of additional memory and the fully enabled chip. So you're moving from $2,000 to 2,500. Probably would want at least 1 terabyte of storage in this kind of product. Honestly, this is one thing where I don't agree with Apple whatsoever. This device starting with 512 gigabytes is ridiculous. It should start with a full 1 terabyte, and then honestly, all per gigabyte prices should be halved. But that's a completely different discussion. But yeah, this is a configuration. Yes, obviously, I know I just made it 35% more expensive, but this is roughly, if you are really like an enthusiast, and you know you are, this is where I would recommend it. Now, is this one a bad configuration, right? The bin chip, 36 gigs of memory. Let's keep it at 1 terabyte though. Is this bad? No. However, given the fact that most of you will still probably have some use cases for a laptop, this bint M4 Max performs really well, even on a 14-inch MacBook Pro. So, and on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, it basically performs perfectly. So if you really don't want to go the full M4 Max chip, yes, of course, you have to pay more to put this chip in a MacBook Pro, but you get a MacBook Pro. You get a mini LED screen, keyboard, trackpad, all that stuff, right? So while I know it is a compromise, you would have to build your experience around the laptop, but given that I kind of expect anyone with the needs for this to also have the needs for at least some form of desktop, instead of building a desktop like this and complementing it with something like a MacBook Air, just get a real MacBook Pro, an M4 Max MacBook Pro, right? And the funny part is, with how efficient Apple Silicon is, you aren't even getting lower battery life with an M4 Max MacBook Pro than you are getting with a MacBook Air. So that is probably my recommendation, to just go slightly higher here, so you can actually leverage it. Also, the upgrade from 48 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes is actually one of Apple's better value upgrades, because here you pay $200 more for 16 additional gigabytes. Here you pay $200 more for 12 additional gigabytes. And on the entry-level Apple devices, you actually pay $200 more for just 8 additional gigabytes. So yeah, in this case, 48 gigabytes is probably more than enough for you. But if you really want to like go a little bit crazy, honestly, again, if you need 128 gigabytes of memory, you don't need me to tell you that you need 128 gigs of memory. And at that point, 800 gigabytes, $800 probably feels like a steal to you anyway. So if you need this, you don't need me to tell you. And if you're just a regular consumer, go a little bit all out, get this. But honestly, if you are not a baller consumer, right? So you're like, technically you can be a consumer, you can be a baller consumer who just likes to spend more money. You can be a prosumer who genuinely needs like more memory, more performance, or you can be a full-on pro who needs like actually sometimes quite ridiculous amounts of storage and memory. And you can actually see, by the way, Apple gets like greedier here by charging you more between like, or do they? No, it's $1,200 and this. Okay, so they do not get greedier per gigabyte, but they're still plenty greedy per gigabyte. Yeah, but again, there's nothing quite like that. But again, if you need that, you don't need me to tell you. Can't upgrade RAM on base M4 Max feels bad. Kind of torn between Spec Up Pro versus Base Studio now. The problem though is like, I would argue, and I know that like gaming is a small part on Macs and stuff like that, but you really get something better here with the fully enabled one. You don't just get 40 GPU cores, 16 CPU cores, you also get more memory bandwidth because the binned one doesn't fully fill out its 512-bit bus. So you would get also more memory bandwidth here, which is not mentioned. So yeah, obviously it would probably be cool to just go from 36 to 48 without having to pay the extra money for the fully enabled M4 Max. But I would also argue you can probably live with paying another $300 here. It's honestly for the M3 Ultra where the upgrades get ridiculous because you pay $300 here. Technically, upgrading an M3 Max from a binned version to a non-binned version should be cheaper by now than upgrading the M4 Max to the from upgrading a binned M4 Max to a non-binned M4 Max. But you're paying literally like this should be $600 if you just double it. Honestly, considering the generational difference, this should be $500. But they charge you 3 times more because they know that this specific upgrade is also going to target like people who actually have those needs, right? In fact, also funny enough, they don't even give you like 1 gig of extra memory for that upgrade, which I wish they would at least give you 128 gigabytes for that enormous amount of money. But these are actual pro prices. This is where we get a little bit closer to how NVIDIA treats their Quadro lineup than they treat their GeForce lineup. Because Apple kind of assumes that no regular consumers is buying the Ultra chips at all. In fact, I don't even think that they are targeting this to like YouTubers, because even an 8K video with like multiple streams of input and stuff like that is honestly very, very fine on the M4 Max. So yeah, very, very interesting in a slightly bad way in terms of pricing. So this is where my recommendations fly out the window, because honestly, if you are somebody who needs M3 Ultra, and I'm saying this for the 10th time now, you don't need me to tell you which one you need. You know that much better than I do. But also, even if you are an absolute baller pro, maybe wait for some reviews. Maybe wait to find out what like how the scaling is. Maybe there are some scaling issues and stuff like that. So and let me know too. Yeah, the question becomes M4 Max versus Pro GPU performance difference. How much do I need? And what if I want RAM? Yeah, but yeah, those are then very specific decisions to you. I've said my piece, and now I'll hold my tongue. Let's see if Apple has anything more for us. So MacBook Air. This is honestly crazy because I kind of expected today's stream to be like, well, still decently long, about like maybe 1.5 hours, but like I really expected tomorrow's stream to then go crazy. I actually freed up time for tomorrow so that I can stream tomorrow, but yeah, it seems like I'm probably still gonna stream tomorrow just to recap all the stuff about the iPads, about the Macs, but for now, definitely we are kind of satiated with so much information. Guys, do you have any more questions? Because I know that there have been some like disagreements about like the M3 iPad. Like, by the way, there's one thing that I would like to correct from yesterday. I've covered the keyboards, and I have to say, and this is honestly something that I don't like the way it's being covered, and I don't think I like the way I covered it. But like a lot of people were complaining why there's a new Magic Keyboard. I don't understand that complaint, to be honest. I mean, you could still buy the old one if you really want to. It's probably compatible with this one. This new Magic Keyboard is also compatible with older iPad Airs, even going back to the 4th generation. So it's clearly not like some artificial lock. Apple clearly has problems giving you the same form factor of keyboard when they make devices very differently thick, right? The iPad Pro, ironically, being the thinnest one, and the Air being right in the middle here. So 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, about 7 millimeters. But the one thing that I want to say about the Magic Keyboard for iPad Air, it's seemingly just like the Magic Keyboard Folio, and that probably explains the small $20 price difference between them. And it probably explains why it's only available in white. It doesn't have backlit keys, so it compensates for that partially with white keys, right? Because it assumes that with a little bit of the light from your actual display, the white, that's obviously much more reflective than a black keyboard, reflects enough for you to like be fine with it. But honestly, my recommendation is the Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro is great. Maybe don't buy it at MSRP, but it's not bad. These two, like, yeah, the Magic Keyboard Folio is a cool form factor, but you know where you can get this form factor for less money for this? It's here. Oh man, it never jumps to English, even though I write .com. So United States, shop, no, wait, what? Jesus Christ, I hate it when websites bombard you right away with like ads. Here, get a Combo Touch. It's so much better than the Magic Keyboard, and it's cheaper. For the base iPad, it's $100 cheaper. Oh, by the way, they even updated on the website. It's compatible for the 10th gen and the A16. So this case protects your device from the sides too, right? It has a kickstand that supports more angles. It has a keyboard with backlit keys. And it has a mechanical trackpad that I believe is actually a slightly bit larger, but maybe not quite as nice feeling. It has a soft touch keyboard material that actually doesn't collect dirt much. And it even has like a holder so you can put in your USB-C Apple Pencil, or even like your Apple Pencil Gen 1. So this is an absolute slam dunk, almost $100 in savings for a better product across the board, but at least those are similar products. And now when we look at the iPad Air, well, now you're looking at savings of around $70, right? And by the way, it's compatible between the same generations. It's interesting that the iPad Air 13-inch M2 is separate here than the 13-inch for M2 and M3. Maybe that's like an older version that's only compatible. But like if you look at this here, and especially here, right? So you don't get the beautiful floating mechanism, but you get so much great stuff. And don't forget, Apple's cheaper Magic Keyboard doesn't even give you the haptic trackpad that you get on the iPad Pro Magic Keyboard. And yes, you don't get an extra USB-C port, but you can actually take off that keyboard, use that case, while with the Magic Keyboard, that's not a freedom you have. So this is why I don't understand the obsession of certain reviewers, specifically with Apple stuff. I do understand it when it comes to more exclusive stuff. Like, for example, when you look at Logitech, even themselves, where do I have it open? Right? Where have I stuff for iPad specifically? Not iPad keyboard cases. What was it called? Folio? No. Guys, do you remember what that Logitech pen is called for the iPad? I might just look for iPad stuff. It's the Logitech Crayon, right? So yeah, you can get it, right? And it's probably a decent choice for the 10th generation and A16 iPads that don't get the best Apple Pencils. But no matter how much more expensive the Apple Pencil Pro is, I would argue for the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, it makes infinitely more sense than either the USB-C Apple Pencil or the Logitech Crayon. And iPads don't really work too well with other styli. They don't support like all those Apple Pencil features on any other stylus. Even that Logitech Crayon is old and has barely the feature set of the original Apple Pencil. So in that regard, I would argue that yes, if Apple suddenly took crucial Apple Pencil capabilities away from you, kind of what they did with the 10th generation iPad, that is a reason to complain. But if you cannot get a perfect Magic Keyboard from Apple, who cares? You get better alternatives from other companies. Or you get alternatives that are so much cheaper that, sure, they might not be as nice as a Magic Keyboard, but at that point, the value proposition is still in the favor. And especially if you buy the iPad Air, which is $600, and now a Magic Keyboard for it is almost half the price at $270, right? This is closer to 1/3 of the price, which makes it much more sensible, and it's even way, way more sensible on the base level iPad, where you pay either $250 for a $350 product, or you pay $160 for a $350 product. Which one sounds more sensible to you? Right? So this is why I don't get this obsession by some YouTubers with specifically like, oh, an Apple product needs an Apple case, or an Apple product needs like an Apple keyboard. That's not true. And in fact, you can also make it all work nicely with like wireless mouses, I'm sorry, and wireless keyboards. So this is also like shopping recommendation, I guess. I mean, I've already talked yesterday about like what I think about like what you should get in terms of iPads. So the iPad Pro, I treat it similarly to how I treat like MacBook Pros with M4 Max chips, or how I treat M Ultra Max Studios, right? If you know you like it and you have the money for it, just get it. For most people, I recommend the iPad Air, or alternatively a discounted or refurbished older iPad Pro, specifically in this case an M2 iPad Pro. M1 probably would start to lag a little bit behind too much. I have an M1 iPad Pro and it's obviously more than fine, but in comparison between an M3 iPad Air, I would kind of recommend getting an M2 iPad Pro. Magic Keyboard trumps all other third-party keyboards because they can't get the API from Apple? No! Logitech works perfectly. I know it. I have it. I have the Logitech Combo Touch. It is a design. The reason why the Logitech accessories are so special in that regard is because they do work with Apple together. They do have access. It's connected physically. It's not a Bluetooth keyboard or anything like that. I would argue the keyboard feels actually just as nice on Apple. And yes, versus the iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard, I would argue, yeah, you lose like the premium aluminum build and you lose like the haptic touch trackpad. But that's not what is happening in comparison to the Magic Keyboard for the iPad Air, right? The iPad Air does not have a full aluminum body. The iPad Air does not even have backlit keys. It doesn't have a haptic touch trackpad. So in that regard, no, I absolutely disagree. This assumption that this is honestly the same kind of thing that I hear from those people, and it's just honestly not true. Plus, you get the versatility of this Combo Touch. It's actually like two pieces, right? You can disconnect the keyboard and you can just use it with a super nice, super versatile kickstand on the back. That's so much more freedom than a Magic Keyboard. Yes, it doesn't look as sexy on that hinge design, and it's floating in the air. But do you really need your iPad to look sexy rather than be functional and save you a bit of money? So with the iPad Air, again, 11 or 13 inches will depend upon you. Usually, I would argue if you are buying 13 inches, because technically the only other 13-inch iPad Air is the previous generation, I would argue this one actually makes even more sense to look at discounted or even refurbished iPad Pros, because there are a lot more iPad Pros that had 13-inch sizes. So you might actually get like some killer deal that surprises you. But otherwise, I would argue storage, don't go beyond 256 gigabytes. Again, if you really need it, you probably know it. But even I, with my relatively premium workloads, relatively and trying out games and stuff like that, saving some videos and whatever, I'm fine with 256 gigabytes on my M1 iPad Pro. So most of you probably will be fine too. And again, cellular, you probably know if you need it. I know personally that I need it. Right now, my iPad runs on 5G while my MacBook is connected to Wi-Fi. I also don't like using personal hotspot and running down the battery on my iPhone, making it too hot. But it's a $150 upcharge, so really consider carefully if you want to. In terms of colors, I would argue the colorful colors on the iPad Air are too subdued. Just get it in space gray. And when we are looking at the base iPad, which now isn't called 10th gen or anything, this one on the colors, choose the color you like because you actually get some pretty vibrant ones. For most people, I think that if you are buying in that price category, 128 gigabytes will be fine for you. 256, still okay. Definitely, if you are maybe in need of 512, you should be looking then more at like refurbished or discounted iPad Airs rather than buying an MSRP base level iPad. Because look at that. Now you're looking at almost doubling the price for quadrupling the storage. It's really a hard sell. At this price, you are paying more than for the entry-level iPad Air. And here, usually Wi-Fi and cellular, $150. That's a big ask for a product that starts at $350. So again, if you really think you need one, it's not like I'm saying, oh, your needs aren't justified. At that point, I would just recommend you also look more into discounted or refurbished iPad Airs that might have 5G rather than get an MSRP A16 iPad. So those are my recommendations. I know some YouTubers, like some believe that the refurbished market is endless and that everyone should always only buy older products, and other treat it as if it doesn't exist. And I'm so confused by either take because the discounted market will not be enough to satisfy everyone. People will still largely buy new products. But of course, the older and refurbished market, especially for specific configurations, might make way more sense than MSRP device. Does the iPad Pro 2018 11-inch work with the newest Magic Keyboard for iPad Air? I guess I can look. So 2018 11-inch iPad Pro. So that's the one with the A12X chip, right? Jesus, I have so much stuff open at this point. Let's look at iPads. Let's look at keyboards. Let's look at this specific keyboard. iPad Air. No, it does not mention any compatibility with Pro iPads. Does it? Yeah, no Pro level, at least not officially. We've seen sometimes devices support stuff that isn't officially supported, but at that point, I just wouldn't I wouldn't risk it, would be my recommendation. So you're basically asking, but the problem is if you have a current 2018 iPad Pro, right? So my assumption is you want to upgrade your iPad Pro to an iPad Air, but you also want to keep your Magic Keyboard. My issue with that is that's side grade almost. Like, sure, the chip will be way better, right? An M3 chip absolutely destroys the A12X chips. Like, it's 5 generations newer at this point. A12 to A13 to A14, A14 being equivalent to M1, and then M2 and now M3, right? But you are losing stuff like ProMotion over that iPad, which I would argue, once you've gotten used to it, is probably pretty hard to give up on. You might be way better served with like a, and I've said it again and again, a discounted or refurbished older iPad Pro, maybe an M2 version, right? That one should largely be the same price. And no, it will not be compatible with your Magic Keyboard. By the way, no, I don't even know what I made up for your use case. My brain is starting to melt down. Obviously, if you're asking about the new Magic Keyboard, you're asking it for your iPad Pro, not to upgrade the iPad Pro that you had to an iPad Air. But hey, if somebody had questions about upgrading an old iPad Pro to a new iPad Air, I think I've answered that too, just by accident. Just checked, M4 Max literally double M4 Pro GPU performance at 1.5 times the price. Gotta save up. Yeah, if that makes sense to you, I absolutely agree. When is the MacBook Air releasing? The MacBook Air is, you can pre-order it right now. It's retro. It's available starting next Wednesday. So that means start getting reviews next Tuesday. So I might take the weekend off just to let all the info we are getting now kind of like compound, and then on Monday and on Tuesday we'll probably get reviews for the Mac Studio, the MacBook Air, the iPad. We might get actually a day with multiple reviews, and maybe both days. Maybe Apple will also differentiate between the M4 Max Mac Studio and the M3 Ultra Mac Studio in terms of review embargo. But yeah, the MacBook Air can be pre-ordered now and will be available next Wednesday. I think the same is true for the iPad Air. We can actually check that out. Yep, the same thing. Pre-ordering now, available starting next Wednesday. And then when we go to the base level iPad, pre-order now. Delivered March 12th. Yeah, so the same thing here. And then when we go to the Mac Studio, same thing. So Apple really is like jam-packing these 2 weeks with like all the announcements right now, and then next week all the reviews. So Monday to Tuesday we should be getting all the MacBook Air reviews, the iPad, and then whenever the iPad reviews, the Mac Studio reviews. Maybe some devices might get their reviews day one, like literally on Wednesday, but I wouldn't be surprised if we just got like one iPad and one Mac on Monday, and one iPad and one Mac being reviewed on Tuesday. Thanks. I was considering switching to Mac, and the Air is perfect to me. Well, welcome to the family, both this community and the Mac family. It's like one of us, right? It's like from Finding Nemo. I'm dating myself by saying this. Mac rumors. So YouTube. Okay, so there's nothing new here. MacBook Air M4 will miss this. I guess they're talking about. Okay, so I guess people are making. Oh, by the way, yeah, I didn't even consider that. If you're really into ports, you get one extra USB-C port on the MacBook Pro. That I mentioned, but you also get HDMI and SD card slots. I don't personally care too much about those extra ports, but Astucets iOS. Oh, that's you, man. That's cool. So I guess I'm attracting some of the same people that are on Apple's forums. That's honestly not too surprising to me. 95 Mac. With M4 chips, Apple hints at making it key change for the first time. Okay, so not every chip generation will get an Ultra. They're basically saying the same things we already read. As Stu says, yeah, we found you. Guys, more questions, more content suggestions. I guess by the like right now there probably will not be too much extra like content by other YouTubers about it, because like this stuff just came out and they are not making live streams, they're making dedicated videos, so they cannot churn out content as fast as I can. Is the upgrade from M1 MacBook Air worth it? Yes, if you need extra RAM or storage than what you have on your MacBook Air. But from a raw performance perspective, while M4 is definitely more responsive, you are still stuck with like, well, I mean, the M1 MacBook Air was the older design, right? So you do get the newer design, but you still are stuck with like a 500 nits, 660 hertz screen, right? So if you are coming from an Apple Silicon MacBook Air, I would really recommend you look not just to upgrade in terms of generation, but also upgrade in terms of category. So upgrade from a MacBook Air to a MacBook Pro. I think that will make more real life impact on you. Thunderbolt 5 should have enough bandwidth to drive 5K 120 Hz or even 240 Hz. With display stream compression, definitely. Waiting for studio display upgrade, please Apple. Maybe tomorrow, who knows? But I doubt it, because obviously when we look at all this stuff, right, they're showing it with like the studio display and the Pro Display XDR. Yeah, and I mean, there are some other small changes here, like for example, the front ports on the M3 Ultra Mac Pro, they're like Thunderbolt 5, and on the regular one, only the back ports are Thunderbolt 5. Honestly, I don't recommend anyone upgrades for small stuff like this. Do you think 256 gigs is enough storage? This is a completely meaningless question. It's retro, because it's entirely dependent on your use case. For example, is 256 gigabytes of storage enough for me on my M1 iPad Pro? Absolutely. Would it be enough on my MacBook Pro? No. But I also don't necessarily need the 1 terabyte that I have on my MacBook Pro. 512 gigabytes is probably more than enough, because I rarely fill up more than 300 gigabytes. In fact, if I didn't have a Windows installer in Parallels, I probably could get by with 256 gigabytes. So roughly, yes, given how much stuff is in the cloud these days, but overall, no. If that makes sense. Wait, there isn't a jack port on the front of the Mac Studio like the Mac Mini? Nope. But honestly, that has something to do with like pros, because this is something that I've actually seen people complain about with the Mac Mini when it came out. A lot of pros, even people in my stream, were like, wait, why does it have a front headphone jack? I don't need it to connect to my 3.5 millimeter headphones. I wanted to connect to like my professional speakers. I need this port to be on the back. Right, and I think this is the thinking behind the decision to keep it on the back for the Mac Studio, because I think the people I think if you're really using like highest end headphones, you probably can make do with like connecting it with like a DAC over USB-C port, and then keeping your back 3.5 millimeter headphone jack for like your speakers and stuff like that. And if you have like a completely professional audio system, then you know what you need. You don't need me to tell you. Put it on the side then, I guess. Well, that sounds like the worst of both worlds. That doesn't sound aesthetically pleasing, and that does also sound like it would be really bad. Because imagine if you put it on the left side, right? But you like having it on the. Imagine you put it on the right side. side, but you like keeping it on the left side of your display, right? So now it would like awkwardly protrude here rather than here, right? No, the side is not an answer. In fact, I did this like, it kind of works, I guess, for the iMac, though not too much either. But on the Mac Mini or Mac Studio, I don't think it's a sensible solution. iMac, right? The iMac is the one with the port on the side. Yeah, here it is, the little hole. Flip down the Mac Mini. Yeah, I guess that works. Both sides then. Yeah, I guess that's how you work it out. Though at that point, what do you do if you're like a professional audio worker? You get two 3.5 millimeter jacks, neither of which is good enough for your high-end equipment, right? Like now you paid, like now Apple built that shit in for you to never use it. But yeah, I understand it. Obviously, it's situationally dependent. I think that these decisions also really show that pro team that Apple created, right, that focused more on like, that resulted in the creation of the iMac Pro back in the day, that basically pushed John Turnus to what he is now inside Apple. I think that this team really cares about making sensible decisions that actually make sense for the product and the specific audience it attracts. I think the Mac Mini is more attracting regular users who might just want to connect a regular pair of headphones right at the front, and the Mac Studio is more attractive to audio pros who want to connect their speakers all conveniently in the back without like routing anything through the front. Yeah, okay, of course, as an option, it wouldn't be bad. I mean, at that point, Apple could even give you like an extra, like full-on Pro port, right? Like they already optimized their 3.5 millimeter jacks for high impedance audio. Now it would be like real Pro level. You can have two 3.5 millimeter jack for more speakers. Who knows? Apple makes some questionable decisions sometimes. Yes, but I would argue two 3.5 millimeter jacks at a time when Apple is removing 3.5 millimeter jacks from everything would be the more questionable decision. In fact, I myself, this is connected to my USB-C earpods. Yes, technically they would fit really nicely in my 3.5 millimeter jack on my MacBook Pro, but because these are compatible with my iPhone and my iPad, they're way more attractive to me that way. So I have a little dock that connects to Ethernet because I do want the most stable internet. It takes up one USB-C port, but it can also charge. And it also has USB-A ports, and it has USB-C, one USB-C port for data. And that is what I'm using now. So it really, guys, it really doesn't take too many workarounds to get nice audio to your Mac. In fact, Macs are kind of notorious for being the best machines for high-end and audio workloads ever. I have a base M1 MacBook Air, 8 gigs, 256. I ran a DeepSeek model with 8 billion parameters locally, and it lagged. I mean, yeah, good that it ran at all, I guess. So just thinking it was cause of RAM. The question is, do you need to run the DeepSeek model? That's also something I ask a lot of people these days when they're like, oh, but LLMs are so much faster with more memory. I'm like, okay, but like, do you need those LLMs? And this is like, if it's your work, you probably know better than I do if you need more memory. But yeah, if you have the absolute base, old design M1 MacBook Air, then yeah, upgrading to M4, even on the MacBook Air, will be a very nice experience. But again, if you can afford it, go with maybe an M3 MacBook Pro, a discounted one, because that will still give you real world performance improvements, but also like the nicer screen and stuff like that. And if you can afford it, go with the M4 MacBook Pro. Would be nice if the studio came with an XLR jack so you can directly connect the Pro mic without external DAC. Yeah, It would be nice, but it would be definitely overkill at that point. Like, is my audio bad for most of you? Like, I connect my Shure microphone not via its XLR, I connect it via USB-C, and I think it's perfectly fine. Look, I know that for certain workflows, you probably would want to make it run over XLR, but now we are really looking at very specific niche use cases that I mean, like, what's interesting about the Mac Studio is they don't even charge you more for like 10 gigabit Ethernet, for example, the way they do on the Mac Mini. So they really created a design where they don't want to drill any more ports or want to create like any difference in ports except for the front-facing ones. So I'm not really sure there's too much more room for stuff like this. How people does on that MacBook when the jack port is on the left, but I need it on the right? No idea. I have USB-C earpods. What were they called? Earpods, I think, back in the day. And I obviously have USB-C on both the left and the right. But also, yeah, I don't think it's such a big issue, obviously. But on the Mac, I would argue it's a smaller issue because your Mac is so much smaller and the cable just nicely like falls down. So it doesn't even really matter too much whether it comes from the left or the right, I would argue. Maybe on something like the MacBook Air, it's a reasonable thing, like concern, because obviously you have the headphone jack on the right side, right? But you have all your USB-C ports on the left side. So yeah, but you can decide for yourself how big of a problem any of that really is or isn't. Guys, last shout out for you to do all the YouTube jazz. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video. Give me comments of what you want to have answered or stuff like that. I'll be here either tomorrow or on Friday. I'm not yet sure. If something launches tomorrow, I'm definitely covering it tomorrow. But if not, I'm probably going to take a day off to just take care of my voice that I'm slowly starting to lose. And a small shout out to also do all the direct support stuff, super chats or super stickers, becoming a channel member right here on YouTube, or support you over on Patreon. I know it's a big commitment, but it really helps me keep this channel going, help me make more regular live streams, help me make these live streams for longer. So if you can do that, please consider doing so while we slowly wrap up, so this doesn't turn into a stream significantly longer than 3 hours. I'm still here for at least another 10 minutes though. Kind of doesn't affect it that much. You get used to the other side, like many Windows laptops has a different side. I agree with that. The chip that zips, man. Apple's marketing terms are very funny in that regard sometimes. Apple Intelligence again. Oh, by the way, one thing that I'm not gonna react to like to other videos today because that would just take up too much time. But I've seen like people talk about like the lack of Apple Intelligence, and those are often the same people who, like, for example, Greg's Gadgets, who like aren't the biggest fans of Apple Intelligence, but they're like, oh, this device is phenomenal value, but it's weird because it doesn't have Apple Intelligence. And I'm like, it's half the price. Right? Apple's cheapest iPad that supports Apple Intelligence is the iPad Mini at $500, and Apple's cheapest iPhone that supports Apple Intelligence is the iPhone 16e at $600, right? Of course, a $350 product might miss out on Apple Intelligence, just as smaller iPads and very cheap iPads are still losing out on features like Stage Manager. It's not a new differentiation tactic. And then there's like Drew from Tylosive Tech, where I know he also complains about stuff like the Magic Keyboard in the video. Oh my God, they translated the titles again. But like 2 new iPads are already a disappointment, right? And part of it is he'll bring up that it has no Apple Intelligence, as you see from the thumbnail. But then when you actually listen to Drew talk about Apple Intelligence in other videos, he calls it a joke or a disappointment. And once again, they are for some YouTube cannot stop translating my titles for some reason. Even though here, like this, they're keeping this top 10 wishes for Apple Intelligence, but they're calling it the intelligence of Apple is a joke. So the translation into German here is an absolute joke. But like, I hate that hypocrisy between like, oh, this device lacks Apple Intelligence, it's worthless. Apple Intelligence, what is that? It's worthless. Kind of boring to hear Apple about Apple Intelligence. They haven't stopped since WWDC. Well, that's the point, right? You don't need to really listen to any of that, even in today's coverage, right? Look at all that. Look at how much we've covered. Right? And then when it comes to Apple Intelligence, like built for Apple Intelligence here, and that's it for this part, right? And then the MacBook Air, that's here. So fresh sky blue performance. And then they talk a little bit about Apple Intelligence and then about the camera. I would flip those two things. I would also put display support. So on the MacBook Air, I would argue they definitely prioritized Apple Intelligence over actual features in a way that I don't think they did for the Mac Studio. So yeah, I can understand being a little bit like bothered by it. By the way, one thing that I am interested in, did Apple make videos for the new devices on their YouTube channel? Oh my God, YouTube, what the actual F? I'm typing in Apple, and Apple is not even like in the top 10 results. No, the iPhone 16e are their last videos. Jesus Christ, YouTube is like getting worse and worse. Whatever AI is feeding them is like worse than Apple Intelligence. Yeah, I mean, we can briefly check out if there's any new stuff. I mean, thank you guys so much for putting my attention on things like the fact that, okay, so M4 family of chips, no video. Thank you guys for clarifying that. I love it when you guys can act a little bit like a hive mind and solve little tasks for me, like bees for a queen. Yeah, but no, nothing new. And we have talked plenty. We're close to the 3-hour mark. And I'm slowly wrapping this up. I've already given you the shout out for all the YouTube jazz again. Thank you so much for tuning in such great numbers, for being so active in the comment section. This has been tremendously fun to me, though my energy level is drastically falling. I was able to also get less political than yesterday because without any pricing questions, I didn't have to mention anything about tariffs or stuff like that. Well, I mentioned it briefly, but I literally just mentioned it. And of course, tune in for future coverage, right? Hit the notification bell beyond all the other YouTube jazz I already mentioned. And of course, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. I'll see you guys then, either tomorrow or on Friday, but I'll let you know. You can also follow me on Twitter to find out, or on Blue Sky, by the way, trying to move as much away from Twitter as I can. But unfortunately, every person that I interact with on social media still prefers Twitter. Even those who moved to Blue Sky are still mostly on Twitter. So maybe you guys can help me with that transition. But beyond all of that, just a giant thank you for making this such a fun video for me to make. I'll see you guys next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.